Today, I want to recap Book 1 Water of Avatar The Last Airbender, as told through Magic the Gathering, taking time to explain all of the major characters and events, while deconstructing how wizards represented those ideas in their card designs. If you've never seen the show, then after watching this video, you will have a solid understanding of Season 1. And if you're already familiar, and you're anything like me, you probably won't mind me talking about something you love for an excessively long time. This naturally means this entire video is spoilers. So, this is your spoiler warning. It's all spoilers from here on out. Literally just spoilers. Avatar The Last Airbender is a kids show. I think that's an important context to understanding how it works. It's often lighthearted, takes time to make jokes, and while there's a lot of fighting and violence in it, most of the time people just walk it off. Despite that, it dives into some pretty serious subject matters, which we're going to explore as we go through the story. But first, let me tell you about the core mechanics of its magic system that also inform the structure of the entire world. Bending. The world of Avatar is split into 4 nations: the Water Tribe, the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation, and the Air Nomads. Each of these has their own people and culture, strongly informed by their bending. The setting is at a pre-industrialization technological level, with some exceptions. Bending is a magical control over an element. Waterbenders can make water flow through the air, twist its shape to their will, and even freeze it. Similarly, earth, fire, and airbenders manipulate their respective element, although each in their own unique ways. If you're new to this idea, then think about bending as magic restricted to a specific element. But in the world itself, bending isn't considered magic. It's much more akin to a martial art, as it's expressed through forms and stances of physical movement, all inspired by different real-world martial arts. There's a physicality to bending that makes it satisfying to watch and easy to follow. The different bending disciplines also aren't just recoatings of the same ability. Rather, they each require a fundamentally different mindset and techniques. In that way, I think Wizards did a great job at making all 4 disciplines feel very distinct from each other. Waterbending is an additional cost that can be paid when playing waterbending cards. This cost may be paid using mana, but also by tapping creatures and artifacts you control. Waterbending requires pre-existing water. Waterbenders can't conjure water out of nowhere, which is why we often see waterbenders carry around pouches with water in them, like in Bender's waterskin. Because of this, it makes a lot of sense for waterbending to interact with permanence, representing our need for the physical object of water. It's also a discipline that lends itself well to collaboration, and we often see waterbenders bending in unison, like in Waterbending Lesson, and that of course plays well into the convoke aspect of Magic's waterbending. However, the Water Tribe isn't usually shown relying much on tools or technology. They are a more spiritual and communal folk. The Bender's waterskin is really as close as we get to tools enhancing waterbending, which means the artifact inclusion of waterbending isn't a good flavor fit. This is where Wizards took some liberties to make the mechanic more playable in a magic environment. Waterbending is a very adaptive bending discipline. It can be used to create huge waves that splash onto your friends as you jump into a pool, just as well as tiny, precise icicle spears to fight with. A waterbending master is one that is creative and quick thinking. Because of that, making it an additional cost that can be used for all manner of different cards was an appropriate choice. Earthbending is a triggered ability that places +1/+1 counters on a land we control and turns it into a creature. When that land creature dies or is exiled, it's returned to the battlefield tapped as a land again. Just like waterbending, earthbending requires material, earth, which is then manipulated. This manipulation can shift the earth underground, but also raise it out of it, allowing earthbenders to fling rocks at their opponents or to quickly and easily build structures. Earth doesn't just include soil, but also rocks. Earth Kingdom cities tend to be really large and impressive, because even something as magnificent as the Wars of Ba Sing Se isn't too much trouble for a country of earthbenders. Without Earth, an earthbender has nothing to bend. But of course, Earth is quite abundant, literally the ground we walk on. Equating lands to Earth is the obvious and correct choice. But animating the lands so they can attack is a bit broader in its interpretation. Earthbenders control the Earth, they don't give it autonomy. Once the Earth stops being bent, it returns to Earth. The most literal way of representing this would have been to tie the earthbended land to the earthbending card. But that feels difficult to keep track of in a physical card game, and it also would have been quite restrictive. There couldn't have been instants or sorceries that earthbend. So instead, Wizards opted to make the bended Earth return to being a land after getting destroyed, equating to the bending getting cancelled or the attack countered, which is a reasonable middle ground. Earthbending is a rigid discipline. It requires a focused mind and the willingness to take problems head-on. An earthbending master stands their ground and takes a straightforward approach without fear. Wizards' earthbending is equally simple, and as such does a great job of representation. Firebending is a triggered ability that generates red mana as the creature with firebending attacks. This red mana lasts until end of combat. Firebending is different from water and earth. It requires no object, it comes from within. Often understood as anger and rage, firebending is fueled by emotion and manifests as either quick bursts of fire or constant streams. Firebenders can also bend existing flames, but unlike the other disciplines, when their bending stops, their flames don't extinguish if they don't have to. Something set on fire by firebending will continue burning. This makes firebending inherently more dangerous and potentially destructive. The Fire Nation are the antagonists of The Last Airbender, an industrialized nation that builds vehicles and tools out of metal, with their firebending acting as forge and fuel. As such, their fire is usually portrayed as a threat, and they tend to be aggressors. Fire is used for fighting, where it's by far the most aggressive of the elements. Firebenders attack with fire, and defend by attacking with fire. They are fast and agile, and try to win by overwhelming their enemies. This all easily falls in line with the aggressiveness of red. Firebending creating mana, which can only be channeled into instants or activated abilities, really highlights how firebending is all about speed. Firebending comes from the will and desires of its user. A firebending master can channel their emotions and physical prowess into rapid attacks full of force. Wizards depicted this perfectly. Finally then, airbending. Permanents and spells can be airbent by spells or activated or triggered abilities that say they do. Once airbent, those permanents and spells are put into exile, from where they may be cast again for 2 mana. Airbending technically requires material, air. However, as you might imagine, that's not much of a restriction. So for all practical purposes, airbenders, like firebenders, can always airbend. But that's where the similarities end. Airbending is a defensive discipline, focused on evasive maneuvers and disengagement rather than force. Admittedly, a lot of that stems from Aang, who is the only living human airbender we meet in the show, and he's a person that avoids conflict when possible. His fighting style is centered around tricking his opponents so he can flee, or disarming them when that isn't possible. Although in the world of Avatar, disarming somebody often means having to knock them out. When not fighting, Aang is constantly airbending. He uses it to fly through the air with his trusty glider staff, to jump up and down heights that wouldn't otherwise be possible, and even just to move around more quickly than regular humans could. Airbending allows for superhuman speeds, which is quite useful even for mundane tasks. Aang's people, the air nomads, also relied on airbending for their everyday needs. even constructing their ancient homes in such ways that airbending is necessary to properly access and use them. While this is by no means unusual for any of the nations or disciplines, they definitely took it a few steps further than the rest. An airbending master is Aang. He's the only reference point the show gives us. And he's tricky, quick on his feet, and always aware of his environment, which he uses to his advantage when possible. Translating this into a single magic mechanic is a difficult task. Wizards settled on one that is very adaptable gameplay-wise, which is a reasonable choice. It doesn't represent airbending directly, but rather the vibe of it. Still, I have to say that this one feels the most disconnected from what airbending actually is. Bending is inherited. The only way to become a bender is to be born as one. Generally speaking, benders of each kind are found in their respective part of the world, although this isn't a hard rule. And of course, each bender only has mastery over one element. Except for the Avatar. The Avatar is a person of immense physical, magical, and spiritual might. They can bend every element, with talent unlike most others, and have access to a wide range of secondary abilities which we're going to explore later. Only one avatar is alive at a time, and if that avatar dies, a new one is born to the next nation in the cycle. Aang is the avatar we follow, and he's an air nomad. Before him came Roku from the Fire Nation, then Kyoshi from the Earth Kingdom, and then Kuruk from the Water Tribe. Each of these avatars is their own respective person, but they also all continue to live on within the current avatar and are capable of occasionally sharing their knowledge and abilities. Our story begins in the South Pole, where we meet Katara and Sokka, two siblings from the Southern Water Tribe, as they are out fishing. Katara is a waterbender, although an inexperienced one. We will soon learn that that is because there are no other waterbenders left in her home to teach her, as the Fire Nation invaded a few years ago with the explicit goal of wiping out all the remaining waterbenders. Katara and Sokka lost their mother in this raid. Sokka is not a bender, but he is a snarky and more than slightly sexist jerk. It doesn't take long for the two of them to get into a fight, which is then cut short by their boat getting trapped in a strong current, crushing it between ice sheets and leaving them stranded on the floating sea ice. Sokka then makes another sexist remark, blaming Katara for the dilemma, which makes her furious, and as she yells at him, she involuntarily waterbends behind her, crushing up ice and causing another huge wave, revealing a strangely round iceberg that seemingly has something trapped in stasis. A giant animal and a young boy. This is Aang's Iceberg, a free mana enchantment that exiles a non-land permanent for as long as it remains in play. This is a fair analogy for placing something in stasis the same way as Aang is here. It also has Flash, which references how Aang actually did this to himself in a moment of desperation. We later learn that Aang encountered an unexpected storm as he was traveling, and then involuntarily used his avatar powers to save his own and his companion's life. Finally, it allows us to waterbend free, to sacrifice the enchantment, and scry too. Surprisingly, this isn't accurate to the show, even though, before checking again, I could have sworn as well that Katara used waterbending to free him. But no, Katara doesn't waterbend to free Aang. Her waterbending found him, but to free him, she simply runs up to the iceberg and smacks it with Sokka's club. A regular mana cost would have been more appropriate here. A couple of hits crack the ice, and then Aang is released alongside a giant pillar of light that rises into the air. Unconscious at first, Aang wakes up and immediately asks Katara if she wants to go penguin sledding with him. He seems fine. More than just fine, in fact, as he climbs back into the iceberg and wakes up his companion, a huge 6-footed creature that he describes as a flying bison. This is Appa. Sokka is very skeptical of this entire situation and worries that Aang might be from the Fire Nation. As the conversation continues, Aang sneezes and launches himself several meters into the air, revealing that he's an airbender. This grabs Katara's interest more than anything else so far. She's always wanted to improve her bending, but was never given the opportunity. Aang might not be a waterbender, but he might still be able to teach her. Sokka decides he's had enough of this and wants to return to their village. Unfortunately for him, he then realizes that earlier their boat was crushed and he doesn't have a way to get back. Aang offers to bring them by riding on Appa, and left with no better options, the siblings agree. Everybody climbs on board, then Aang calls out "Yip Yip," the signal he uses to tell Appa to begin flying. But Appa just jumps into the water and swims instead. Not too far away, we see a Fire Nation ship. On that ship are Zuko, Prince of the Fire Nation, his uncle Iroh, and their crew. Zuko has been hunting for the Avatar for over 2 years, and as he sees the giant light break through the sky, he concludes that it must be the Avatar. He's right, but that's mostly a coincidence, as Zuko desperately wants to find any sign of the Avatar. Iroh interprets the light as a natural phenomenon and tries to talk Zuko into getting some rest. Many have searched for the Avatar before, but none have found him. But Zuko insists that he's different, that he will find the Avatar because he needs to restore his honor. This need is depicted in Obsessive Pursuit, a 2-mana black enchantment that when it enters and at the beginning of our upkeep, we lose 1 life and create a clue token. Also, whenever we attack, we put X+1/+1 counters on target attacking creature, where X is the number of permanents we sacrifice this turn. If X is 3 or greater, the creature also gains lifelink until end of turn. The first ability is a great depiction of Zuko and his self-destructive mindset. To him, finding the Avatar is more important than his health, his life, his everything. It's the only thing on his mind, and he will keep searching, no matter the cost to himself. It's very appropriate that this enchantment doesn't have a May ability. Everything is mandatory. Zuko doesn't think his search is optional either. If the obsessive pursuit goes on long enough, it will eventually kill him. The second ability then is Zuko locking in, as he discovers the Avatar and starts tracking him. However, I don't quite like how this card ascribes sadism to Zuko, finding strength in the sacrifices he makes. Zuko and the Fire Nation are quite ruthless, and they are willing to make sacrifices, but Zuko is never shown to enjoy those sacrifices. He views them as necessary, but still an evil. That also means he has boundaries. Zuko isn't the type to sacrifice his allies. A better depiction would have been to limit the type of sacrifice to artifacts and/or lands, which would have been primarily treasure, clues, earthbending, and fetch lands. This definitely would have made the card a lot worse, but would also have been a more accurate description. We cut back to Aang, Katara, and Sokka, who have arrived at their village, which we now see to be small and devoid of men of fighting age. Women, children, and old folks are all that are left. There, Gran, Katara and Sokka's grandmother, talks to Aang and tells him that she thought airbenders were extinct, as they hadn't been seen or heard of in 100 years. Before Aang has appropriate time to process this, his staff that he had been carrying along is snatched by Sokka, who declares it to be a poor weapon. Sokka views the world entirely through the lens of war. Aang airbends it back into his hand and explains that it's not a weapon, it's meant for airbending. He begins to show it off by expanding the wings hidden inside of it and flying. This is the glider staff, which Wizard depicted in a very simple but faithful way. A 3-mana equipment that airbends when it enters and gives the equipped creature +1/+1 and flying. The conversation continues. We learn that all the warriors left the village after Fire Nation raid a couple years ago to fight at the front lines. Sokka was too young to join them at the time, but he's now the only man in the village of fighting age, and he views himself as their only protector. Sokka doesn't hold this perspective happily, and he's not exactly wrong. Aang and Katara finally go penguin sledding. This is where we get our first good look at the animals of the world of Avatar, which are for the most part combinations of 2 normal animals. The penguins in question are actually otter penguins, and we also get the chance to see some tiger seals. These animals are just regular animals, nothing magical about them, but animals in Avatar are often depicted to be quite intelligent. As they're playing, Aang and Katara find an abandoned Fire Nation ship that was trapped in ice during a conflict many years ago. Aang convinces Katara to explore it with him. As they do so, the conversation steers to the war again, and Aang says that he's never heard of any war and that he even has friends in the Fire Nation. This is where it becomes abundantly clear that he was trapped in that iceberg for a very long time, because 100 years ago, the Fire Nation launched an unprovoked attack on the rest of the world, which has been trapped in a never-ending war since then. It's impossible that Aang hadn't heard of it, unless he was in that iceberg for at least 100 years. This reveal greatly startles Aang. After a moment of rest, they continue exploring the ship, but unfortunately trigger a booby trap, locking them in a room and launching a flare upwards. Aang, being an airbender, has no problem escaping the ship by going through a hole in the ceiling, but the flare had attracted Zuko's attention. He uses a spyglass to view where it came from and sees Aang obviously airbending. Zuko found the Avatar. Aang and Katara return to the village, where Sokka awaits them, furious. He says that by going to the abandoned ship, which Katara knew was dangerous, they've jeopardized the safety of the village, since the flare might attract other Fire Nation soldiers. Sokka is right. He banishes Aang from the village. Katara, outraged at this, decides to join Aang, as he had mentioned wanting to take her to the North Pole so she could study with other waterbenders. But after conversation with him, she decides to return to the village instead. As Aang and Appa are left alone, Aang tells his bison that he really liked Katara. They then get ready to leave for the Southern Air Temple, their home. But as they do, they spot a Fire Nation ship approaching the village and quickly hurry back to help. In the village, Sokka has been getting ready to fight, donning the traditional warrior paint of his people. We see this in Sokka, Wolf Coast Protector. However, as impressive as that card makes him look, he ends up being woefully ineffective if it comes to actually defending the village. As Zuko arrives and descends from his ship, he easily defeats Sokka in combat, knocking him into a nearby pile of snow. He demands to know where the villagers are hiding the Avatar. But they don't know, because they don't know that Zuko is talking about Aang. By then, Sokka has recovered and attacks Zuko again, with slightly more success this time, as he manages to land a lucky hit with his boomerang. We see Sokka's boomerang depicted on both Boomerang Basics and Trusty Boomerang. It might seem like an unimportant detail, but Sokka's boomerang is a fairly big part of how he views himself, at one point even describing himself as the boomerang guy. This lucky hit enrages Zuko, who launches a dangerous attack in return, which is then blocked by a suddenly appearing Aang. Now facing each other, Zuko is shocked to learn that the Avatar is just a 12-year-old boy, and this is also where the villagers figure out Aang's true identity. Zuko and Aang share an important moment here. Zuko shouts that Aang is just a child, and Aang, confused, replies that Zuko is just a teenager. We see here that the war and trauma Zuko has experienced hasn't left him the space he needed for a healthy childhood. They fight for a bit, but Aang realizes that Zuko's fire would inevitably cause casualties amongst the villagers, and so he willingly gives himself up in exchange for their safety. After Aang's capture, the Fire Nation ship leaves. Katara moves to convince Sokka that they need to go rescue him, but as she begins her speech, he interrupts her by pointing at the canoe he had already prepared for this exact purpose. Gran shows up too, and tells them that the village will be fine without them, and that their destiny is to help the Avatar on his journey. Hugs all around. Then they realize that the canoe won't do. Luckily, Appa appears, and they decide to mount the giant bison. In the meantime, Aang is being transported across the ship to be placed in a prison cell. But he correctly identifies that none of the Fire Nation soldiers have any experience fighting an airbender, and so he waits until they are in a tight corridor and then hits them with huge blasts of air that throw them into the floors and against the walls. He manages to free himself without any trouble. You might have noticed the blue arrow tattoos on Aang's entire body. These aren't just curious character design, but also hold in-world meaning. When an airbender becomes a master, they earn the right to these tattoos. Even though Aang is very young, he is considered a full airbending master and starts the story easily capable of taking out a large number of nameless grunts. He then goes looking for his staff, which Zuko had taken from him. He finds it in Zuko's quarters and, unsurprisingly, runs into Zuko. They fight, Zuko throwing dangerous fireballs and Aang on the defensive, dodging and weaving, staying behind Zuko. Airbender's Reversal depicts this fight. Airbender's Reversal is a 2-mana white instant lesson that lets us choose one. Either we get to destroy target attacking creature or airbend target creature we control. I don't think this card does a good job at depicting Aang's fighting style. He doesn't really destroy. In Magic that means murder, and that's something Aang is fundamentally opposed to. It would have been better for the first mode to exile target attacking creature, as exile has a much broader range of interpretation within the context of Magic. The second mode is great though, as it offers the tricky defensive utility that Aang relies on during his fights. But I don't understand why this is a lesson. Nobody's being taught anything here. I suppose maybe Zuko, but that feels like a stretch. We're going to see this across a lot of cards that probably shouldn't be lessons, but they just are so that the lesson synergies within the set work. Eventually, Aang manages to grab his trusty glider again, and here we learn that it is actually also a weapon, as it greatly amplifies his airbending capabilities and lets him quickly win against Zuko. Katara and Sokka are currently floating in the water on Appa. Appa doesn't want to fly, no matter how much Katara tries to encourage him to. Sokka is being sarcastic about it, complaining in the background. Then he remembers that Aang said something very specific when they tried flying for the first time, and so he starts trying to remember what that was. He eventually finds it. Yip yip. As soon as he says it, Appa takes off into the air. Turns out, he really is a flying bison. Both Katara and Sokka are very excited about this development and start heading towards the Fire Nation ship. Aang has made it to the top of the ship, but as he jumps to fly away with his glider, Zuko, who caught up, lunges towards him and grabs his leg. Then they both get distracted by Appa coming into view, soaring through the sky. But Zuko uses this moment to attack, and they both tumble back towards the ship. The fight continues briefly until Zuko manages to overwhelm Aang, and he falls off the side of the ship into the freezing ocean. Katara cries out to Aang as he sinks unconsciously. Then he wakes up, and his tattoos and eyes begin to glow bright blue. He starts bending the water and raises himself up above the ocean surface, surrounded by a tornado of bent water. This is one of the Avatar's unique abilities, the Avatar state. While in the Avatar state, Aang gains access to all the power and abilities of his past lives. He becomes a fully realized Avatar, the strongest bender in the world. However, he also loses control of himself. The Avatar state is depicted in Enter the Avatar state. Enter the Avatar state is a 1-mana white instant lesson that gives target creature we control flying, first strike, lifelink and hexproof, and it also becomes an avatar until end of turn. This is a powerful combat trick and protection spell, and it makes sense for it to be that. The Avatar state is temporary and represents a huge power boost. But something the card doesn't depict, and is a crucial part of our story, is that Aang can't enter the Avatar state at will. He usually only does when faced with some kind of trauma, so a more accurate depiction here would have required some sort of sacrifice as a condition to cast it. Something like, you can only cast this spell if a creature you control left the battlefield this turn. A condition like this would also have allowed the card to be much more powerful, which is something that is amiss right now. The Avatar state isn't a minor buff. It turns Aang into the most powerful human in the world. This also shouldn't be a lesson, because Aang is very explicitly not in control of himself while in the avatar state, which means he isn't learning anything. At first glance, the avatar state seems like a useful tool, but the show rarely treats it as such, and more often than not, the cast, particularly Katara, would rather Aang wasn't in it. Using the avatar state, Aang defeats Zuko, and then his new friends gather him up, and together they ride away on Appa towards the Southern Air Temple. These first 2 episodes introduce us to our main cast. Aang, the cheerful airbender and reluctant avatar, Appa, the flying bison, Katara, the aspiring waterbender, and Sokka, the snarky warrior, make up our heroes. They're represented on Aang, the last airbender, Appa, Aang's companion, Katara, bending prodigy, and Sokka, wolf coast protector. Aang, the last airbender, is a 4-mana white 3/2 with flying that airbends another non-land permanent when he enters and gains lifelink until end of turn when we cast a lesson spell. Most of this card is self-explanatory, except for the lifelink upon casting a lesson, which is a bit odd. This ability is meant to represent Aang learning and becoming more powerful as he goes through his journey, but it does so by giving him a keyword that doesn't feel appropriate. Lifelink to me doesn't represent growth. It would have been better here to give him vigilance or a +1/+1 counter. But what we are encountering here is something that we'll stumble into frequently as we go through the set. A mechanical approximation rather than perfect representation to make the card fit better into the gameplay themes of its intended product. In this case, draft. The designers at Wizards absolutely have to make concessions so their products play well. But for our purposes, I'm going to ignore these considerations and will judge the cards exclusively on how well they represent their source material and interact with other cards within the set. Appa, Aang's companion, is similarly simple. A 2/4 with flying for 4 gives another creature flying, representing how Appa quite literally carries the gang around. Katara, Bending Prodigy, is a 3-mana blue 2/3 that gets a +1/+1 counter if she's tapped at the beginning of our end step, and she can waterbend for 6 to draw us a card. It's a bit difficult to call out which specific Katara card represents her at the start of our journey. Mechanically and based on her name, this one makes the most sense, but both the artwork and the quote in the flavor text are from 2 different points in time. Either way, this Katara allows us to waterbend, although not very efficiently. 6 mana to draw a card is quite a lot. However, when doing so, we're likely tapping Katara for it, and that has her gain counters at the end of turn. Drawing cards in Magic often represents acquiring knowledge, meaning that while Katara has to put in a good bit of effort to waterbend, as she does, she learns and becomes stronger. A fantastic representation of her character. Katara desperately wants to learn how to waterbend, and we already know that she has a talent for it. She accidentally cracked an iceberg open. But she doesn't have any experience and hasn't had any opportunities to learn. Sokka's card is just a 3/3 with vigilance for 3. A vanilla creature with no abilities other than a willingness to keep fighting. And that's all Sokka's got right now. He doesn't have any magic powers, he's untrained as a warrior, and honestly, he's a bit of an ass. But his heart is in the right place, and he's willing to fight to defend those that need it, even if he doesn't stand a chance. We saw this play out in his fight against Zuko. Zuko, Iroh, and the Fire Nation are our villains. Interestingly, both Zuko and Iroh already get 2 cards each, depicting them this early on in the story. Zuko, Exiled Prince, is a red 4-mana 4/3 with Firebending 3 and an activated ability that lets us impulse draw a card for 3 mana. Zuko as an impulsive Firebender. It's not a masterpiece game design, because Zuko is actually willing to make plans, but it's accurate enough. Zuko, Avatar Hunter, is a red 5-mana 4/5 with Reach that creates a 2/2 red soldier creature token whenever we cast a red spell. Zuko, Avatar Hunter, has Reach, so he can block Aang to stop him from flying away. That's not something he usually has much success with, but he does manage to do it in the opening of The Last Airbender, so a perfectly reasonable inclusion here. But the ability to create soldiers is out of place. Zuko doesn't have access to an endless stream of soldiers. He has one ship that always has the same crew. And, as the Exiled Prince title of his previous card already implies, he doesn't currently have the best relationship with the Fire Nation, so they wouldn't supply him with new soldiers either. But there could be an argument made that this card depicts Zuko from the perspective of our heroes, explaining his huge stats and the soldier ability. Zuko's stats actually represent an interesting bit of nuance. Zuko, Exiled Prince, shows Zuko before he discovers that he has actually found the Avatar, and at this point his stats are low enough that Sokka, Wolf Coast Protector, could defeat him. But then, Zuko spots Aang and is revitalized, and then he can take on Sokka no problem. This is definitely a bit of meta commentary from my end though. The show doesn't really imply that Sokka ever stood a chance. Rather, Wizards probably did this stat adjustment to show Zuko getting energized. Iroh is Zuko's uncle and mentor, depicted on 2 cards. Iroh, Firebending Instructor, a red 3-mana 2/2 that gives other attacking creatures +1/+1 whenever he attacks. This simple card highlights an equally simple idea. Iroh is a master firebender and Zuko's teacher. His stats are low and he doesn't buff himself, which represents not a lack of strength. Iroh is very powerful, but rather a lack of passion. Iroh is here for his nephew. He's on Team Zuko. That means he is willing to hunt the Avatar and to fight for the Fire Nation, but only if that's what Zuko wants to do. Left to his own devices, Iroh would be on a very different journey. We see this core idea reflected in Uncle Iroh, a 3-mana Gruul 4/2 with Firebending 1 that makes our lesson spells cost 1 less. In the art, we see Iroh, still at the South Pole, playing a game and drinking tea. His firebending is small because he's not using it to fight, but rather to keep his cup at perfect temperature. This is how Iroh prefers to spend his time, with nice hot tea and giving out sage advice. But we shouldn't fully disregard his role in the story. Iroh is unambiguously a bad guy, acting in support of a war-instigating nation and actively aiding a manhunt on a 12-year-old child. This concludes the opening of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now we know our core cast of characters and have a loose understanding of the world as a whole. From here, we will be moving a bit more quickly. As Aang, Katara, Sokka and Appa travel to the Southern Air Temple, Aang tells his friends how excited he is to return home. In response, they carefully try to prepare him for the possibility that his people might have been wiped out by the Fire Nation. They arrive and find the temple empty and abandoned. This disheartens Aang, but doesn't stop the group from exploring and searching for any potential survivors. While doing so, Aang shows them around and introduces them to a couple of games he used to play with the other airbenders. Then, Sokka and Katara find an old Fire Nation military helmet, which they decide to hide. We move into a flashback of Aang and his old teacher and guardian, Monk Gyatso. They talk, showing great care and affection for each other, and play a prank on the other monks, airbending cakes at their heads. In the meantime, Zuko docks in a Fire Nation harbor, looking to have his ship repaired from the damage of his encounter with the Avatar. He wants to get back to his hunt quickly, and tells Iroh not to let others know that they actually found the Avatar. But then, they run into Commander Zhao. Zhao inquires what caused the damage to the ship, as it's quite severe. Iroh and Zuko lie, unconvincingly. A bit later, Zhao is talking to Zuko in his tent, provoking him and trying to get him to share what he won't tell them. Then, one of Zhao's soldiers appears and informs him that they successfully interrogated Zuko's crew and learned that Zuko found the Avatar and failed to capture him. Zhao becomes even more insulting afterwards, telling Zuko that he'll be leading the search from now on, flaunting his vast resources that the role of commander provides. Their fight continues, until eventually Zhao goes a step too far by claiming that all Zuko's father, the Fire Lord, sees in Zuko is failure, and that's why he banished him. Zuko then challenges Zhao to an Agni Kai, a duel between firebenders. Team Avatar continues exploring the Southern Air Temple, eventually finding the Inner Sanctum, the most holy place that only Master Airbenders can access. Here we find countless statues of all the previous avatars, aligned in a spiral pattern, as well as a little critter, a small monkey-esque creature that made this place its home. Sokka immediately starts chasing after it to catch it for dinner, and Aang does the same to keep it as a pet. As he runs and dashes through the temple, Aang ends up chasing the lemur into an old, tattered tent, where, to his shock, he finds many scattered and ancient bodies of Fire Nation soldiers. He looks further inside and sees the skeleton of his old mentor, Monk Gyatso. Monk Gyatso is a white 4-mana 3/3. Whenever another creature we control becomes the target of a spell or ability, we may airbend that creature. This is an incredibly powerful ability that allows free access to airbending in a way that no other card does, implying an unbelievable mastery over the element. We don't see that mastery from Gyatso in the show. His greatest visible airbending feat is throwing some cakes. However, this scene that Aang just stumbled into, depicted in toils of war, paints a brutal picture. Gyatso, murdered by the Fire Nation, took down an entire platoon of soldiers before going down. We later learn as well that these soldiers were operating at an above normal power level, so Gyatso implicitly killing this many of them is a crazy feat of strength. Given that, it makes sense for this card to be the most impressive airbending in the set. This sight it triggers intense anger and sadness in Aang, causing him to enter the Avatar state. He summons a storm around himself, destroying his surroundings. Katara then arrives and tries to call out to him, but he doesn't respond and continues to rage. Worried, Katara moves through the storm and tries to calm him down. She tells him that she's experienced similar grief, and even though he's lost his people, he's found a new family, and that she and her brother are going to stay with him, no matter what. This manages to calm Aang, and he falls into her arms. He now acknowledges that the air nomads are gone, genocided by the Fire Nation. Aang is the last airbender. They gather their things to leave, and as they do so, the winged lemur from earlier joins them, asking for food. Aang names him Momo, and he becomes the 5th member of the team. Momo has a couple of cards, all in white. Momo Friendly Flyer is a 1-mana 1/1 with flying that reduces the cost of the first non-lemur creature spell with flying we cast each turn by 1, and that gets +1/+1 until end of turn whenever another creature with flying enters. The non-lemur part of this card is quite funny to me, because, as you might expect, the only lemur in Magic is Momo, and Momo, Playful Pet, also only costs a single mana, which means that this text excludes specifically one card, being Momo Rambunctious Rascal. The rest of Momo Friendly Flyer's abilities represent Momo playing with other birds and animals, which happens all the time. Momo Playful Pet is also a 1/1 for 1, but this one has flying and vigilance. When he leaves the battlefield, he lets us choose one from amongst creating a food token, putting a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control, or scrying 2. Earlier, I critiqued Airbender's reversal for destroying an attacking creature rather than exiling it, because that doesn't properly represent Aang or airbending. Momo, Playful Pet, avoided this trap by making his ability a least the battlefield trigger, rather than a death trigger. This means it works with airbending synergies, and it also prevents the implication that our cute little buddy is out here getting killed. Ooh, poor Momo. As for the reward, Wizards did a great job choosing small benefits that aren't game-changing but still helpful. If it comes to their main mission, Momo isn't a playmaker. Rather, he helps out in small ways that still end up mattering. Finally then, Momo Rambunctious Rascal, a 3-mana 1/1 with flying that deals 4 damage to target tapped creature an opponent controls when he enters. This is Combat Momo. It might be a bit of a surprise, but Momo is actually quite the effective combatant on Team Avatar. He often catches people off guard with his surprise attacks, pulling their hats over their head or stealing their weapons. But he is restricted to surprise attacks, which is why this ability requires him to target a tapped creature. As the sun sets over the Fire Nation harbor, Zhao and Zuko begin their Agni Kai. They fight, and at first, Zhao overpowers Zuko, but instead of calmly pushing his advantage, he gets impatient, and Zuko manages to knock him out of his stance, turning the fight around and pinning Zhao to the ground. Zuko wins, but instead of scarring the defeated Zhao, he settles on a warning shot. Zhao calls him a coward. Zuko replies that he should now leave them alone, and that next time he won't be so forgiving. The Agni Kai is finished, but as Zuko turns around to leave, Zhao launches a fireball at his exposed back. This sucker punch is blocked by Iroh, who jumps in to protect Zuko and proceeds to shame Zhao for it. Zhao is a coward, a petulant child, and an opportunist. He's depicted on 3 cards: Zhao, Ruthless Admiral, Zhao, Deceiving Flame, and Zhao, the Moonslayer. We'll leave the last 4 later. The first 2 are fairly generic creatures with simple, basic effects that are hardly worth talking about. Just like Zhao, the only thing they're good for is violence. Zhao is an important antagonist, but he's ultimately just an incarnation of the Fire Nation's military. He's not particularly powerful himself. All his danger comes from what he represents. As such, these cards being so simple is appropriate. If you're new to The Last Airbender, then I imagine you might be a bit surprised at how these first couple of episodes play out. There are a lot of dark and depressing story elements, and while the violence we actively see is cartoonish and kid-appropriate, we're also shown the consequences of violence in the past that are graphic and horrific. Aang's people were wiped out. The Fire Nation committed a genocide. The story will continue on like this. As we travel through the first season, Book 1, Water, we're going to see and experience the damage that a 100-year war has caused to both people and the natural world. This is explored through mostly episodic storytelling, meaning that the episodes are self-contained stories that can be viewed and understood on their own terms. However, there's also the through line of Aang and his friends trying to get to the North Pole so that he and Katara can learn waterbending, while Zuko and Zhao are trying to chase them down. The first place that Team Avatar visits is Kyoshi Island. This is for very good reason. Aang wants to ride on the giant koi. The world of Avatar is a fantastical one. Enormous and magical creatures are just part of everyday life. And so the group lands on the bay of Kyoshi Island, and Aang goes into the water to ride on the big fish. But as he does so, he attracts unwanted attention from and is attacked by the Unagi of Kyoshi Island. This is an enormous eel that eats even the giant koi as just a snack. Aang hurries back to the shore, where his party is then immediately ambushed by an armed group, the Kyoshi Warriors. They capture Team Avatar and carry them to Kyoshi Village, where they are questioned on suspicion of being Fire Nation. Aang reveals that he's the Avatar, displaying his airbending as proof. They are immediately let go, and the news spreads through the village like wildfire, and of course, even travels outside of the village. Up till now, the world assumed the Avatar was lost forever, but now he's returned. Aang becomes a living attraction, something that he thoroughly enjoys and revels in. This annoys Katara, which is fair because Aang is being annoying. He's clearly forgetting the greater goal and letting himself be swept away by the attention. He spends all of his time trying to impress any who are looking to be impressed, although he finds himself needing to take on increasingly bigger and more reckless feats to do so. Eventually, the interest wavers, and he learns that this isn't who he wants to be. I'm hand-waving this part of the episode because it's really not that important compared to Sokka's story. Jumping back in time a little, after getting captured, Sokka finds himself surrounded by warriors wearing a dress as a battle costume and makeup as war paint. They are girls, and he immediately asks where the men are that captured them. In response, he's made fun of, and the Kyoshi warriors explain that there are no men. it was them. Sokka dismisses this, but still seeks out their training grounds, where he challenges the Kyoshi warriors' leader, Suki, to a spar. He's easily defeated and leaves, upset. A little while later, he returns and apologizes, bowing before Suki and humbly asking to be trained by her. He very explicitly states that he was wrong in his sexism and that he would be honored to receive her guidance. Suki accepts, but under one condition. Sokka has to follow all their traditions, including their uniform and their makeup. He agrees, and from that point on, we see Sokka and Suki training together. The Kyoshi warriors are depicted on a range of cards. They're all fairly simple, various iterations of basic attackers. Kyoshi warriors makes an ally token when they enter, which shows that they act as a group. The same idea is also expressed in Kyoshi warrior exemplars, which bust the board, and Suki, Kyoshi warrior, who is as big as we control creatures and creates an ally token when attacking. This was a good element to focus on. The Kyoshi warriors are competent fighters, but by no means unbeatable. They aren't benders and are all still young. But they are a good team, and that goes a long way. While Team Avatar is enjoying their time in Kyoshi village, word has spread to Zuko. He arrives and starts attacking the village, setting fire to many of its buildings and threatening to destroy it in its entirety. Team Avatar and the Kyoshi warriors fight back, but quickly realize that the best option is for Aang and his group to flee. This fight is depicted on Stand United. If you take a close look, you can see that the two Kyoshi warriors are Suki and Sokka, who is wearing their traditional outfit. As he has to leave, Sokka apologizes to Suki one last time. He tells her that he shouldn't have treated her like a girl, but a warrior. Suki then responds by giving him a kiss and telling him that she's a warrior, but she's also a girl. This is a pivotal moment in Sokka's sexism, who from this point forward becomes a lot more open-minded and accepting. As the gang flees, Zuko stops attacking the village and tries to chase them down. But the village is still aflame. Looking back onto that horrific sight, Aang jumps off of Appa and into the ocean below. Moments later, the Unagi pops out again, with Aang steering it from its head. He uses it to spray water at the village, extinguishing the fires, and then he leaps from it back on top of Appa and they disappear. The Unagi isn't an essential part of this episode, but it still received two separate cards, one of which is clearly designed to be a bit of a chase card for Commander. We're going to see more of this as we journey through the story. Magic's designers really like the big monsters and spirits of the world, giving them disproportional representation. As a Magic player, I have no issue with this. I like big monsters. But that also means they took a lot of liberties when designing these cards, as they are vastly more important in the set than they are in the show. The Unagi of Kyoshi Island is a blue 5-mana 5/5 serpent with flash. This shows how it can appear seemingly out of nowhere, although that is a bit of a stretch because, well, it's really big and people definitely notice it before it arrives. It also has a ward, Waterbend 4, which is an interesting ward cost, implying that to fight the Unagi, Waterbending is required. We don't really know if that's accurate, since nobody ends up fighting the Unagi. Another possible explanation though could be that the Unagi is a waterbender itself, which isn't ever explicitly stated, but we do know for sure that all kinds of animals have varying degrees of bending abilities. Appa is the best example here. He flies through the air using airbending. And I think there's also a fairly easy argument to be made that Momo has to be airbending as well, as otherwise there's no way those small wings could support that big of a body. The Unagi's spray could quite reasonably be interpreted as waterbending, and the ward cost might be a reference to that. Although its final ability, whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, we draw 2 cards, is purely mechanical. The next stop of our journey is Omashu, a mighty Earth Kingdom city that's been built on an isolated mountain in a way that only Earthbenders can. When the gang first arrives, they get up to some nonsense with the city's delivery system, channels that travel from top to bottom and which are used to transport goods. Aang explains that 100 years ago, he used to slide down these channels with his friend Baumi. Team Avatar then recreates this activity, Aang having a great time and everybody else fearing for their life. Until they crash, which results in a poor innocent cabbage merchant having his cabbages destroyed. This is a recurring character that shows up as a running gag, always with a cabbage cart that is then destroyed in one way or another, followed by the scream, "My cabbages!" The cabbage merchant has no proper role in the story, but is a fan favorite because he's funny, which is why he got 2 cards, both of which are quite powerful. They both have food-related abilities that center around creating and sacrificing food, which is appropriate. He always shows up with new cabbages that are then destroyed. But again, he isn't really important to the story, so there isn't much else to be said about him. The havoc caused by Aang leads to the group being captured and dragged in front of the king of Omashu, an old, decrepit-looking man that declares their punishment shall be a feast. He then demands Aang complete 3 trials. To ensure that Aang does, he places creeping crystal on both Katara and Sokka, which is a fast-growing rock that will soon encompass their entire body. The first trial, which isn't depicted on any card, has Aang gather a key suspended underneath a waterfall. He does so via a combination of throwing a rock and airbending. Important note, he isn't earthbending. He can't do that yet, he just throws a rock. The second trial tosses Aang into an arena with a small rabbit-like creature and a giant ape-shaped monster. He's tasked to return the king's pet Flopsy. At first he's scared of the ape and runs from it, but then he figures out that that's actually Flopsy, who's mostly harmless. For the final trial, the king has 2 scary-looking warriors come up to the left and right of him. He tells Aang to point at who he would like to face in a one-on-one battle. Aang carefully considers his options, and in an attempt to outsmart, points at the old king himself, who then throws off his coat and reveals an impressive muscular physique. Wrong choice, he says. Turns out the king is a master earthbender himself, and Aang can only fight him to a draw, but the king still considers this good enough to pass. With the 3 trials cleared, Aang demands that his friends be freed. But the king asks him one final question. What's my name? Aang, at first upset by this sudden change in the terms of their agreement, finally realizes who he had been dealing with. His old friend Baumi. The crystals are then revealed to never have been dangerous at all, and rather that it was edible rock candy, which is why the card creates food tokens. Baumi then explains that Aang has a difficult task ahead of him. The world has changed a lot over the past 100 years, and if Aang ever wants to defeat the Fire Lord, he has a lot to learn. He needs to become adaptable and think like a mad genius. The trials were meant to help him become better at that. The two then share a moment, cruising down the delivery channels together, crashing into the poor cabbage merchant again. There are 3 Baumi cards. We'll talk about 2 right now. Baumi, King of 3 Trials, is a green 6-mana 4/4 that when he enters, lets us choose between 3 modes. We can either put 3 +1/+1 counters on him, let the target player scry 3, or earthbend 3. We get to choose as often as we have lesson cards in our graveyard, although we can't choose the same mode multiple times, effectively capping him at 3 lessons. This card clearly represents Baumi and his 3 trials, although the choices here are a bit weird. Putting 3 counters on himself is his big reveal that he's actually a powerful earthbender. Letting target players scry 3 represents him sharing his wisdom, giving others the opportunity to accumulate knowledge, which is fantastic. While this will certainly be mostly used to make yourself scry 3, the option of passing it along is a great way to enhance the flavor of the card. The last option then is Earthbend 3, showcasing that Baumi is a powerful earthbender. Yeah, option 1 and 3 are mostly the same, which I think is a missed opportunity. I feel like something should have been done with clues here, as Baumi's trials are all a part of a larger riddle, and particularly the first one required Aang to think outside of the box. Or, have Baumi create a Flopsy token. Baumi, Eclectic Earthbender, is a green 5-mana 4/4 that earthbends 1 when he enters. Then, whenever he attacks, he puts 2+1+1 counters on each land creature we control. This card doesn't depict a moment from the show, but rather projects Baumi's vibe as a fighter and diplomat. He prefers large, dramatic actions rather than many small ones. In the card, we see this as he earthbends only a single time and then focuses on powering through with that alone. Team Avatar are traveling through the Earth Kingdom when they stumble upon a young man practicing his earthbending deep in a forest, who runs away as soon as he realizes that he's been spotted. Our heroes decide to follow him, not to chase him down, but in hopes of finding a village and proper dinner. They end up in a small town, which is under strict Fire Nation control. They spot the young man from earlier again, follow him into a store, and ask him why he ran away. He explains that the occupying Fire Nation has outlawed earthbending, and all earthbenders have been imprisoned offshore, in a prison entirely made out of metal. His mother is here as well, and she explains that his father is amongst those jailed. Later that day, Katara and the young man, Haru, are talking and sharing stories. Their life experiences align in many ways, being terrorized by the Fire Nation and losing a parent to them, and they quickly form a strong bond. Then they hear a large rumble and hurry to the source of the sound. An old man was near the entrance of a mine, which collapsed and trapped him underneath a large pile of rubble. Haru could easily free the man using earthbending, but he's reluctant to do so because it would give away that he's secretly an earthbender. But Katara manages to convince him, and so Haru frees the old man. Later that same day, during the night, Fire Nation soldiers arrive at Haru's house. The family is confused, but then the same old man that Haru saved earlier in the day steps forward, points at Haru, and calls him out as an earthbender. This harrowing act of betrayal is depicted on Sold Out. The Fire Nation has created an environment so unforgivingly hostile that nobody can be trusted, for they might turn on their own people at any given moment. As soon as Katara learns that Haru was taken captive and shipped offshore, she becomes determined to free him. She pretends to be an earthbender and lets herself be captured. The prison is run by a ruthless, aggressive, and impulsive ward. He's been breaking the earthbender's morale so thoroughly that when Katara arrives and begins making an impassioned speech to try and rouse the earthbenders into resistance, he simply watches on, confident that nothing will happen. And he's right. The earthbenders are devoid of hope and refuse to fight. She finds that Haru has reunited with his father, who has taken on a leadership role, and explains that their goal is now limited to surviving the war. This is unfortunately not depicted on any cards, which is a real shame because it's a crucial part of the episode and the story as a whole. The world is in a state of hopelessness, and if Aang is to become its savior, then he first needs to revitalize it. All of these small adventures that might seem meaningless on their own are essential to spreading a message of hope. The Avatar has returned. Frustrated, Katara secretly meets with Aang and Sokka, who've been following along on Appa. They try to come up with a way to give the Earthbenders their fighting spirit back. This is going to require Earth, but there isn't any on this industrial metal rig. But then Aang points out there's smoke coming out of the chimneys, which means the Fire Nation is likely burning coal, and coal is Earth. Sokka then comes up with a clever way to bring a large amount of coal onto the deck. The next day, Team Avatar executes this plan, giving the Earthbenders a weapon to fight with. But they still refuse. The Warden then appears, mocking them that the Earthbender spirits were long shattered. He's right. But Haru, who has just gotten here, is an exception, and he can't take it anymore and launches an attack on the Warden. The Fire Nation soldiers then retaliate, which brings Haru's father into action to defend his son, and that spurs on the rest of the Earthbenders. United, they, assisted by Team Avatar, defeat the Fire Nation soldiers and take control of the prison. Now motivated and with hope, Haru's father declares that it's time to take back their town and also to free any other Earth Kingdom community from the control of the Fire Nation. A little while later, Katara notices that her necklace is missing. This necklace was given to her by her mother, and as such is incredibly important to her. We cut to the now empty prison, and we see Zuko picking up the necklace from the ground. The most noteworthy card of this episode is Haru Hidden Talent, a 2-mana green 1/1 that earthbends 1 whenever another ally we control enters. The more allies Haru has, the more comfortable he becomes using his earthbending, highlighting not only the bonds forged, but also the waning control of the Fire Nation. This ally sub-theme stretches through the entire set, and that makes sense because it's also an important part of the show. As I already touched on, step 1 to saving the world is returning hope to it. Aang can't take down the Fire Nation by himself, he needs willing allies to fight alongside with. Our episodic adventure story is about making those connections and fixing what's been broken. Something a little odd though, is that in both title and flavor text, this card puts emphasis on Haru being a powerful earthbender, which might be true, but diminishes the messaging of this episode. Haru isn't imprisoned for being a strong earthbender. He's imprisoned for being an earthbender at all. The Fire Nation is fully suppressing this entire culture, regardless of individual circumstances. Also, and this is a bit of a petty point, but I don't know, bothers me a little. Make note of any cards depicting Katara going forward. If she's wearing her necklace, then that's actually a mistake. She doesn't have her necklace right now. As Team Avatar flies over a forest, they spot a huge black scar. A significant portion of this land was burned to the ground by the Fire Nation. Aang, as the Avatar, is the guardian of balance and nature. Seeing this sight distresses him greatly. He blames himself for not being here to prevent this violence. Katara then tries to soothe him by showing him an acorn and telling him that the forest will grow back and survive. They are then surprised by an old man who has appeared to ask the Avatar for help. His village has been under attack by the spirit Heibai, and since the Avatar is also the bridge to the spirit world, he's the only one that can help them. Aang agrees, but the young Avatar has no idea what he's actually going to do. Somewhere else, Iroh has found himself a natural spring that, by firebending, he's turned into a hot tub for himself. This is a really minor thing, but we don't usually see firebenders using their firebending for anything other than attacking and destroying. Except for Iroh, who uses it to heat his tea and make a nice hot tub, and I think that's kind of meaningful. Zuko, irritated by his uncle's lax attitude, has left the old man alone, which I'm sure Iroh is kind of okay with. But this turns out to be a mistake, as Iroh falls asleep and is only woken up as he's taken captive by a patrol of Earth Kingdom soldiers. They accurately identify him as General Iroh, brother to the Fire Lord, who once laid siege to the great Earth Kingdom capital of Ba Sing Se for 600 days. They tie him up and mount him on their ostrich horses and start heading for that very same city so that Iroh may stand trial for his crimes. However, Iroh leaves small trails behind so that Zuko may find him. Zuko has at this point figured out that his uncle was captured, he chases down the Earth Kingdom soldiers, and together with his uncle he defeats the patrol. Here we see Iroh fight properly for the first time, and it turns out he is quite the mighty warrior. This fight is depicted on Master's Guidance, a green 3-mana enchantment that, whenever we attack with 2 or more legendary creatures, lets us put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 attacking creatures. It also draws us a card at the end of our turn if we control a creature of power 4 or greater. This card highlights the pair coming together and fighting as one, master and student united, growing in strength and wisdom because of it. The name reflects not the guidance in the moment, but rather the lessons of the past. Team Avatar arrives at a village that's clearly been under assault. It's explained to them that during the night, the spirit Heibai has been appearing, thrashing their homes and even kidnapping some. They don't know what they did wrong or what they can do to fix it, and ask the Avatar for help. The night comes, and Aang is the only one not hiding in the village's town hall. Then Heibai appears, a huge creature with long, mighty limbs, sharp teeth, and an unmistakable anger. It starts breaking down more houses, and its only response to Aang's pleas is more violence. At one point, it hits him hard, flinging him against the roof of a nearby house. Sokka decides he can't continue idly standing by, and rushes out to help Aang. He manages to attract Heibai's attention, although not to his benefit. The spirit grabs him and runs off. Aang immediately chases after them, but just as he's about to catch up, Heibai and Sokka disappear into the spirit world. Aang returns to the village to inform them of his failure, but as he tries to talk to Katara, she can't seem to hear or see him. He realizes that he too has taken a spirit form. Then a dragon appears. It reaches out to Aang's forehead, communicating telepathically. This dragon is Fang, Avatar Roku's, the previous Avatar, animal guide, and it communicates to Aang that he needs to travel to a crescent-shaped island in the Fire Nation to speak to Roku. It also shows him a vision of a blazing comet. He needs to get moving as soon as possible, because Roku can only speak to him during the upcoming winter solstice. Fang then takes Aang back to his body, who's sitting meditating in the middle of the destroyed forest. Fang was Avatar Roku's animal guide, empowering its master during both their lifetimes. Appa is Aang's animal guide. When Roku died, he continued to live on in the spirit world, and so did Fang. These two ideas are reflected in Fang, Roku's companion, a red 5-mana 4/4 with flying that buffs another legendary creature whenever it attacks, and returns to the battlefield as a spirit when it dies. Corporeal again, Aang returns to the village. He waits until nightfall, and Heibai appears once more. This time, Aang communicates with Heibai using the same kind of telepathic touch that Fang used on him, learning that Heibai is the spirit of the forest, and that it's angry because of the damage the Fire Nation caused. Aang then speaks to it, and shows it the same kind of acorn that Katara had shown him a day ago. He too explains that the forest has already begun regrowing. This calms Heibai, who then turns into a giant panda, leaving quietly. As he does, all the kidnapped villagers and Sokka appear again, safe and sound. Aang then informs his friends that he has to go to Crescent Island. His original plan was to leave alone, but they insist on coming along. This episode is important to both the show and also to our understanding of Wizard's interpretation of it. We're given two separate Heibai cards. In the grand scheme of things, Heibai is basically a random spirit. You could argue that it's just the monster of the week. But in the same way that the Unagi received an impressive and unique card, so did Heibai, with Heibai Forest Guardian, a card clearly designed to be a competitor to one of the most popular commanders. This card's abilities center around shrines, which doesn't really have anything to do with the Heibai from the story. One of Avatar's strengths is that it's unapologetically fantastical. There's bending and intelligent animals and mythical creatures and spirits and the whole spirit world. The fantasy elements aren't just a part of it, they are interwoven with its very essence. And it's clear that this attracted Wizard's interest, as it fits well into the existing aesthetic of Magic the Gathering. But there's a component to the spirit world that they have ignored, the spiritual side of it. The spirit world is a parallel plane of coexistence, filled with godlike and religious beings. Spirits are treated with reverence, and, when interacting with them, Aang's goal is usually appeasement. Interfacing with the spirit world is something he has to slowly learn, and this episode shows us the beginning of that process. But Wizards didn't make a card for this moment. They're treating the spirit world as a house of monsters, and, for the most part, ignoring Aang's connection to it. Even the card Lost in the Spirit World doesn't depict Aang. Let me be clear here. I like that Heibai was given a cool card with evocative gameplay implications. But I don't think we needed two Heibais, and it would have been better to have a card showcasing Aang's first contact with the spirit world. Wizards' disregard of this aspect is the biggest shortcoming of the set. Aang needs to get to Crescent Island to talk to Roku. But it's in Fire Nation territory, so the journey there is dangerous. On their way, they have to get past the Fire Nation blockade, which they manage to do, but not without trouble. They're also chased by Zuko. Zuko commands his ship to follow the Avatar even into Fire Nation territory. Iroh calls out to him that he's banished from the Fire Nation, and that going back might lead to him getting arrested. Zuko doesn't care and argues that his father would understand. Iroh disagrees, arguing that Fire Lord Ozai isn't the understanding kind. Zuko heads for the blockade. At first, it seems like they might not get through, but Zhao, who's commandeering it, tells his soldiers to let Zuko pass. This is not an act of kindness. He knows Zuko only has one goal, and Zhao wants the same. Team Avatar arrives at Crescent Island Temple, where they are confronted by the Fire Sages. Long ago, the Fire Sages would have been loyal to the Avatar, but not anymore. They attack our group, who flee while trying to get to the heart of the temple. But they don't know where to go and get cornered by one of the Fire Sages. To their luck, this one remains loyal to the Avatar and offers to take them to Roku. Of course, this is encountered with some skepticism, but the loyal Fire Sage manages to convince Team Avatar, and he keeps his word to the very end. Team Avatar then arrives at Roku's sanctuary, but can't get in because opening it requires 5 simultaneous blasts of fire. Katara and Sokka come up with ideas on how to break in, and when that doesn't work, how to trick the Fire Sages into believing that it did. The loyal Fire Sage then calls the others, making them open the door to the sanctuary, which gives Aang an opportunity to sneak in. Once Aang enters, the doors to the sanctuary close and stay closed. Roku won't let anyone else in. Aang is unsure what to do. In front of him is a giant statue of Roku, but he doesn't know how to communicate with it. Then, he notices a beam of light that has almost reached the face of the statue. As the solstice reaches its zenith, the light touches Roku's face, and Aang finds himself standing in front of the old Avatar. Roku is mighty and imposing, and displays care and wisdom in all his actions and words. He explains that he called Aang because of the comet he had shown him before. 100 years ago, this same comet appeared in the sky, drastically enhancing the might of all firebenders, and was used by Fire Lord Sozin to start the war. Now, at the end of this summer, Zozin's comet will return again, and the current Fire Lord Ozai, will use it to win the war for good. Aang has to master all of the elements and take down the Fire Lord before the comet arrives, because if he doesn't, it will be too late. Aang is, understandably, overwhelmed by this. He doesn't know how he could possibly become a full Avatar that quickly, but Roku believes in him and tells him that he's done it before. Aang then asks how he could talk to Roku again. Roku replies that he's always part of Aang, and should the need arise, they will find a way. He then tells him that there's danger waiting in the temple and offers his help. Aang accepts. Outside the sanctuary, Team Avatar, who were chased by Zuko, and Zuko, who was chased by Zhao, have all been captured by Zhao. The Fire Sages and Fire Nation soldiers are both waiting in front of the sanctuary doors for Aang, but as they swing open, Avatar Roku stands before them. The sages flee immediately. Roku then easily dispatches all of the soldiers and Zhao, who also run back to their ship, and then Roku proceeds to destroy the entirety of the temple. Both Team Avatar and Zuko barely manage to escape the collapsing building. We've now been given a schedule. Previously, Aang and his friends operated without much time pressure, but now they know that Aang needs to learn all the elements before the end of the summer, giving him less than a year. We also get a good look at why that is important. what the power of a fully realized avatar is actually like. Roku tore down a massive temple without any trouble at all. Roku is depicted on 2 cards, Avatar Roku Firebender and The Legend of Roku. We'll talk about The Legend of Roku later. Avatar Roku Firebender is a red 6-mana 6/6 with a unique firebending ability. Whenever any player attacks, we get to add 6 mana, which lasts until the end of combat. This is the same as firebending, except that Roku doesn't need to attack himself. He can channel his energy through others, which is also shown in his second ability. For 3 red mana, he can give a creature +3/+0 until end of turn. Roku is the wise sage, the kind mentor. He knows all, and he is an expert beyond our understanding. I love how his abilities depict that. He still clearly firebends, but does it in a way that no other card can, and he uses it not just for his own benefit, but also for those of others. Roku may have been Fire Nation, but remember that he predates the war. When Sozin began his invasion, Aang was 12, meaning Roku passed away that long ago. Roku wasn't part of the hostile Fire Nation that we see today. We also learn about Sozin's Comet. Sozin's Comet is a 5-mana sorcery that gives all of our creatures Firebending 5 until end of turn. Firebending 5 is massive, only one step removed from what Avatar Roku can do. Your average Firebending soldier has Firebending 1, and even many of the masters we see depicted sit at only Firebending 2. Sozin's Comet provides a huge power boost, turning every grunt into a bender above the level of a master. This further puts into perspective how insanely powerful Gyatso must have been. I swear, I'm not here to just power scale, but when the Fire Nation initially invaded, they did so with the help of Sozin's Comet, and Gyatso still decimated their ranks. Gyatso must have been crazy. Sozin's Comet also has Foretell, referencing its upcoming return. After learning about Sozin's Comet, Aang feels much greater pressure to begin learning the other elements. While Katara isn't particularly confident in her own abilities, she still offers to teach Aang what little she knows. At the same time, Zuko notices that his ship is diverting from course, now moving to a nearby harbor. Turns out that Iroh lost the White Lotus tile for his Pai Sho game, and he wants to go to a market to replace it. White Lotus tile is a 4-mana artifact that enters tapped. It taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is the greatest number of creatures we control that share a creature type. Pai Sho is a game that Iroh likes to play. He's quite fond of games and other community activities. For example, it's repeatedly shown that on Zuko and Iroh's ship, they host a regular music night amongst the crew. I love these small elements of world and character building that give us an insight into what the character's up to when we aren't watching. The White Lotus tile represents Iroh in those moments. It becomes more powerful the larger our community. Interesting too is that it's adaptive. Usually these kindred effects have us select a creature type and then provide benefits based on that selection. But the White Lotus tile doesn't discriminate. If we move from soldiers to otters, it will still gladly welcome all. If Iroh had no other obligations, he would just travel around the world, drinking tea, playing music and competing in games, with any and all who would like to join him, and this card showcases that. There's more to be said, but that's for a later time. Right now, Zuko is quite annoyed about their detour. He thinks Iroh is wasting his time, and to be fair, he's mostly right about that, but he still goes along with it. Team Avatar has set up camp at a small river. Katara begins teaching Aang what little she knows about waterbending, starting out by showing him a few forms and asking him to imitate her. She patiently explains that it might take Aang a little while to get the hang of it, as she found it quite difficult. But the young Avatar instantly performs the move with seemingly greater control than she did. This annoys Katara a bit, but she still moves on to the next lesson, which Aang, yet again, mirrors with ease, and this time with a clear gap in skill. Katara, now visibly upset, tells him that she knows one more move, but she's been struggling with it herself. She raises her hands, trying to summon a large wave, but it quickly collapses. Aang then gives it a shot and summons a massive wave that soaks the entire gang. Happily, he asks for more lessons, but Katara has had enough. Irritated, she declares that for today, they don't need to keep practicing. Sokka then chimes in, also annoyed, because Aang just washed all of their supplies down the river and now they have to go into town to get new ones. We see a new side of Katara in this episode, one that has to tackle with Aang being an incredibly gifted bender. It makes sense. Not only is he the Avatar, but he's already an airbending master who was extensively trained. The bending disciplines are all their own beast, but we do learn over the course of the story that there are transferable skills between them. But Katara never had the opportunities that Aang did, and now he's surpassed her in a single day. It's understandable that she would get frustrated and competitive. In town, they browse around a bit, and we learn that Aang can't be trusted with money, as he spends a good bit of their remaining funds on a bison whistle. Bison whistle is a 2-mana green artifact. It taps for 1 mana, which lets us look at the top card of our library. If we find a bison there, we may put it directly into play. Otherwise, if the card is a creature, we may reveal it and put it into our hand. If we don't, we can either put it into our graveyard or just leave it on top. The bison whistle starts out as a joke. Aang buys it impulsively, and when he blows it, it doesn't make a noise. But we later learn that it's basically a dog whistle. Appa can hear it just fine, even from great distances. Other animals can hear it too, but don't respond to it in the same way that Appa does, who understands it as a signal to fly towards the whistle. This is all captured by the Bison Whistle card. Bison can hear it and will head towards it, meaning if we blow the whistle by activating it and there's a bison nearby, then we get it right into play. Appa is currently the only bison in the game, if we exclude changelings. But this is a type I can definitely see returning in the future. I mean, it's just an animal, it's just a bison. If we blow the whistle and there's no bison but a different animal, then it might still respond to it, but not understand the specific instruction, which is why we add it to our hand instead of into play. This is where we have a miss in the card's design. Humans can't hear the bison whistle, so a more accurate representation would have specified non-human creature. Finally, if we blow the whistle and nothing is nearby, then nothing can respond. But that doesn't stop us from searching. We might want to move into the direction where we suspect our bison to be, represented by surveilling. Browsing the harbor, the gang gets invited onto a ship full of curious merchandise. These pirates have wares from all over the world, including a rare waterbending scroll, which Katara immediately wants. It's the closest she's ever gotten to finding a waterbending teacher. Aang tries to negotiate for it, but its price is far out of reach, and the pirates aren't interested in going lower. Then, Katara, nervously and hurriedly, pushes her friends out of the ship, clearly wanting to leave, and quickly at that. They don't make it particularly far before the pirates start chasing them, weapons out and shouting. Aang and Sokka are quite confused by this, but that doesn't really matter, as they still have to run away. Back at camp, Katara then reveals the source of their troubles. She stole the waterbending scroll. The first technique Katara wants to learn from the waterbending scroll is the water whip. This is a blue 2-mana sorcery lesson that also requires us to waterbend 5. It then returns up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands and draws us 2 cards. The bouncing reflects how in combat, waterbending is usually used to immobilize opponents by freezing or stunning them. The card draw is Katara learning. The flavor text on this card is incorrect. Not in the way that Katara doesn't say, the key is getting the wrist movement right, but rather she says this earlier during the waterbending lesson. Opposite to what's implied here, Katara struggles quite a bit with performing the water whip. She can't seem to get the movement right. Aang has no such problems, again nailing it on the first try. This causes Katara to fully lash out against him, but as soon as the words leave her mouth, she already regrets them. She apologizes and hands him the scroll. Back in town, Iroh hasn't found a lotus tile, but lots of other stuff. Zuko overhears the pirates discussing the bold monk and waterbender girl they are chasing. They're obviously talking about Aang and Katara, so Zuko teams up with them. In the middle of the night, Katara gets up and takes the scroll again. She moves away from camp to practice the water whip some more. It doesn't take long before she's ambushed and captured by the pirates. Zuko appears and reveals that he has her mother's necklace. He offers it in exchange for telling them where Aang is, but Katara obviously turns this down. Zuko is now in possession of the scroll. The pirates want it back, but he threatens to burn it unless they help him capture Aang. This also doesn't take long. The pirates are quite proficient at their craft. It's actually really impressive. Now, with everybody gathered, Zuko wants to complete the trade, but Sokka reveals that Aang is the Avatar, and the pirates correctly deduce that he's worth a lot more than a waterbending scroll. They decline the trade, causing Zuko to attack. The rest of the episode is a skirmish between Team Avatar, Zuko, and the pirates, each hunting for their respective bounty, and Team Avatar trying to flee. Even Momo gets in on the action, first freeing Katara and then winning a fight against the pirates' iguana parrot. Team Avatar manages to escape by collaborating on their waterbending and also by calling Appa with the bison whistle. As they fly away, Sokka even reveals that he managed to snatch the waterbending scroll. Oh, and it turns out that Iroh hadn't lost his lotus tile, as he finds his in the sleeves of his shirt. For once, Team Avatar is traveling through a forest by foot, because Sokka pointed out that the reason why Zuko keeps finding them is that Appa is so easy to spot. Unfortunately, they stumble into a camp of Fire Nation soldiers, but before either side has fully processed the situation, a troop of fighters descends from the treetops. They swiftly overwhelm the Fire Nation soldiers and clear out the camp without much trouble. After the fight, the troop's leader introduces himself to Team Avatar as Jet and his group as the Freedom Fighters. Jet has two cards: Jet Freedom Fighter and Jet Rebel Leader. Jet Freedom Fighter is a red and white 5-mana free one that, when he enters, deals damage equal to the number of creatures we control to target creature an opponent controls. This symbolizes Jet's reliance on his group, but also that he's rather violent. Jet fights at the front lines. His second ability is, when Jet dies, get to put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. This symbolizes something else. We'll talk about it later. Jet Rebel Leader is a white 4-mana 3/4 that, when he attacks, lets us look at the top 5 cards of our library, then put a creature with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. This Jet recruits new allies as he attacks. He is quite the smooth talker, but then he immediately sends them to the front lines, perpetuating his violence. On top of Jet, we have a whole bunch of cards depicting the Freedom Fighters. Jet is the charismatic and competent leader of a rebel troop that's been fighting back against the Fire Nation's occupation of the nearby Earth Kingdom village. He takes Team Avatar to the Freedom Fighters' hideout, which is hidden in the trees. The gang has a range of reactions to Jet. Aang and Katara are charmed by his strong rhetoric and charisma, with Katara being absolutely smitten. But Sokka is much more skeptical. He feels like something is off, but he can't quite figure out what that is. It's hard to tell if there's actually something sinister going on, or if Sokka is just being a contrarian. Either way, he wants to leave quickly, but Jet, being the smooth talker he is, tells Sokka that he relied on him and that he really needs him on an important mission tomorrow. Sokka cares about feeling important and buys into this. The next morning, Sokka, Jet, and a bunch of our freedom fighters are lying in ambush. Sokka expects a Fire Nation soldier to be the target, but all who appears is an old man. Fire Nation, yes, but a civilian. This doesn't stop Jet, and he and his troop descend on the old man, beating and robbing him. Sokka tries to stop this from happening, arguing that this is just a civilian, but Jet doesn't see the difference. To him, all Fire Nation is the same, and it all needs to be eradicated. In this moment, Sokka learns that Jet is an extremist, and a dangerous one at that. That evening, he tries to tell Aang and Katara, but Jet lies to them about the situation, and they believe his words over Sokka's. Later that night, Sokka spots Jet and his confidants sneaking out of camp. He follows them, sees how they bring barrels of blasting jelly with them, and overhears their plan. They want to fill the nearby reservoir with water and then blow up the dam, creating a massive flood that will crash into the occupied village, wiping out all within. The Duke briefly argues that they probably shouldn't do this. The civilian casualties would be too high, but Jet simply replies that getting rid of the Fire Nation is worth any sacrifice. Then they spot Sokka and capture him. The next morning, Jet leads Aang and Katara to the nearby river and asks them to bend the groundwater onto the surface to fill up the reservoir. They ask where Sokka is, but Jet simply lies. Then he leads them to their task. During this, Sokka has managed to free himself. Aang and Katara finish filling the reservoir quicker than they thought, and so they go looking for Jet. While doing so, they see a group of freedom fighters loading barrels of blasting jelly in front of the dam. They instantly realize what's going on, but as they try to intercept this act of terrorism, Jet appears again and starts fighting them. He can't win the 1 versus 2, but he doesn't need to. Jet is just trying to stall. It doesn't take long until he hears a signal, which he responds to in kind, and then we see Longshot fire a burning arrow at the dam. The barrels explode, the dam bursts, and huge waves of water flood the river, quickly heading towards the village, destroying it. We see this on Price of Freedom, one of the strongest card names in the set. Price of Freedom is a red 2-mana sorcery that destroys target land or artifact an opponent controls. They then get to search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We also draw a card. Lands have very specific meaning within Magic. They represent the land itself, but not just the land, but also the ocean, the sky, and cities. Often, more complex lands will also display more complex societies. For example, both Shock and Surveillance depict specific structures. So do the Capenna Triomes or the Bondland cycle. This isn't a hard rule, just an observable pattern. If we think about how Price of Freedom is played, then it's very likely to be cast on a non-basic land, which then gets replaced with a basic. A sacred foundry replaced by a plains, a commercial district by a forest. Society destroyed, forcibly returned to nature. One of the best cards in the set. Katara is sickened by Jet's actions, screaming at him. Jet just continues his routine, claiming that now the valley has been freed. Then Sokka arrives on the back of Appa. He tells them that he managed to save the villagers by warning them of the attack. They didn't believe him at first, but then the old man from the day prior vouched for him, and they managed to evacuate everybody. Jet calls Sokka a traitor and a fool, telling him that this was their only chance to get freedom from the Fire Nation. Sokka replies that Jet is the traitor and asks who would have been alive to enjoy that freedom. Katara and Aang join Sokka on Appa, apologize for not believing him, and then Team Avatar flies off, leaving Jet behind. The Great Divide is commonly acknowledged to be the worst episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. This is because it doesn't have anything to do with the overarching plot, doesn't offer much in terms of character development, and frankly, is kind of boring. It can safely be skipped, so I will only offer the briefest overview. Team Avatar arrives at the Great Divide, a massive canyon. There they meet two clans which have been in tension with each other for over 100 years. Both are fleeing from the Fire Nation and need help crossing the Great Divide. Appa flies the old and very young across, and Team Avatar, alongside the Great Divide Guide, shepherds the rest of the group. In the canyon, they encounter canyon crawlers, and at the end of their journey, Aang lies to both clans to get them to reconcile. Great Divide Guide is a noteworthy and powerful card, but gives this guy a lot more credit than he deserves. He's immediately injured at the beginning of the canyon crossing and then doesn't really contribute anything afterwards. Aang is having a nightmare. He's being haunted by visions of the past. His old mentor and guardian, Monk Gyatso, asks him why he disappeared. Aang replies that he didn't mean to, but is further lost in the nightmare as a huge storm forms around himself and Appa, and they then crash into the ocean below. Team Avatar has to go shopping again. As they arrive in a nearby shipping town, an old fisherman has an argument with his wife. He wants to go fishing, but she's telling him that, despite the clear skies, a huge storm is coming and that it's too dangerous. Unwilling to listen, the old fisherman declares that he'll just hire someone in her stead and pay them double. Sokka immediately volunteers. Team Avatar is running low on funds. Now in contact with the group, the old fisherman pieces together that Aang is the Avatar and immediately lashes out at him for turning his back on the world. Katara steps in to defend Aang, but it's already too late. Aang is clearly deeply impacted by the accusation and jumps into the air and flies away on his glider. Sokka and the old fisherman head out to sea. Horrible clouds are forming on the horizon, and it quickly begins to rain. Katara finds Aang in a cave, and he begins telling her about his past. Aang used to be just another among the many airbending students at the Southern Air Temple. He's shown playing with his peers, although it's clear that his bending is on a different level. Then he's called in front of the leadership of the temple, a collection of monks. They inform him that he's the Avatar, which they've known for a long time because of the toys that Aang chose to play with when he was a child. Usually they would have told him only after he turned 16, but external forces are getting them to hurry the process along. We know that that's because of the upcoming war, but Aang had no idea. Aang doesn't know how to react to this information, but becomes visibly unhappy when his friends begin treating him differently. Only monk Gyatso remains the same. But then that's pulled into question as well, as the other monks want to get Aang started on his Avatar journey as quickly as possible, while Gyatso wants to give him a regular childhood. This creates conflict within the leadership that escalates to the point that the other monks decide to separate Aang from Gyatso. In response, Aang runs away on Appa, gets caught in a storm, and turns Appa and himself into an iceberg. Aang ends his story by restating the claim of the old fisherman, that he turned his back on the world and ran away. But Katara disagrees. She tells him, had he stayed, he would have just gotten killed alongside the rest of the airbenders. It was meant to be. The world needs him now. He gives people hope. This resonates with Aang, and he calms down. Then the wife of the old fisherman shows up and tells them that her husband and Sokka are both trapped out at sea in the middle of a horrible storm. Aang and Katara then go rescue them. Elsewhere, during the early stages of the storm, Zuko gets into an argument with his crew. Iroh manages to defuse it only moments before a dangerous escalation, and then decides it's time to tell the crew about Zuko's past. Zuko, Prince of the Fire Nation, is eager to help and participate. He insists on joining a war meeting in front of the Fire Lord. Iroh lets him, on the condition that he stays quiet. But as the generals lay out plans to sacrifice a platoon of new recruits for tactical advantage, Zuko loudly interrupts, calling such a sacrifice a betrayal. Fire Lord Ozai is a black 4-mana 4/4. Whenever he attacks, we may sacrifice another creature. If we do, we add red mana equal to the sacrificed creature's power, and we get to keep that red mana until the end of combat. Fire Lord Ozai is a ruthless and sadistic man. He would not think twice about sacrificing his allies for a brief burst of power or a minor advantage, even for an advantage he doesn't know. As for 6 mana, we can exile the top cards of each of our opponent's libraries. Until end of turn, we can play one of those cards without paying its mana cost. He makes us burn our allies, turn them into fuel, to conquer our opponents, without even knowing for sure what we'll gain. Iroh explains that Zuko was right, but it wasn't his moment to speak out, and as such, there were dire consequences. Zuko was forced into an Agni Kai, which he thought would be against the general he interrupted, but because Zuko did so in the Fire Lord's chamber, It was the Fire Lord who he had disrespected. In the arena, he found himself standing in front of his own father. Zuko begged for mercy, telling his father that he only wanted to help, but Ozai's cruelty knows no bounds. He tells his son, "You will learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher." And then he inflicts a permanent, huge scar on Zuko's face. Ozai's cruelty is a black 3-mana sorcery lesson. It deals damage to target player and forces that player to discard 2 cards. In Magic, we are wizards casting spells from our library of knowledge. The cards in our deck are spells we know but don't have readily available, while the cards in our hand are our immediate thoughts. The deck and hand are also often portrayed as our mind and memory, and cards that either discard or mill are ones that invoke insanity or amnesia. Ozai's cruelty is a discard spell, but also a lesson. It teaches by lowering the cognitive abilities of its victim, by inflicting trauma. It provides nothing of value, it only harms. The same as it did to Zuko. Sokka and Katara are both sick. Left to his own devices, Aang tries to find help, which he does in the form of a madwoman and her cat, who instructs him to collect a bunch of frogs from the nearby swamp for his friends to suck on. She's great. As Aang gathers said frogs, he is attacked by a group of Fire Nation archers, the Yuyan archers, that have recently come under the command of Zhao, who was promoted from general to admiral. The Yuyan archers are famous for their perfect precision and easily capture Aang. Genuinely, they just get him, and then Zhao has Aang imprisoned. This is the end of the last Airbender. His friends sick, unable to help, Aang chained to metal that he can't bend himself out of. But then, a mysterious figure wearing a blue mask appears, sneaking and fighting its way into the prison using only a pair of broadswords and acrobatics. It frees Aang, and then the two escape together. However, on the last stretch of their escape, the figure is knocked unconscious by an arrow. Aang still manages to get both of them out, but not before seeing who his rescuer is: Zuko. Earlier that day, Zuko had expressed frustration that he felt like he lost the race for the Avatar. With Zhao promoted to Admiral, there isn't much he can do to keep up anymore. And that means that his one shot at regaining his honor, his throne, and his home is gone. He must have heard of the capture and then taken things into his own hand, becoming the Blue Spirit. The Blue Spirit is a blue 4-mana 2/4. It gives our first creature spell each turn flash, and whenever a non-token creature we control enters during combat, we draw a card. Wizards mess this card up. The Blue Spirit might be blue in name, but it's an incarnation of Zuko's desperation and recklessness. He would do anything to be the one to capture the Avatar, even commit an incredibly dangerous and easily foiled act of treason. The Blue Spirit isn't a knowledge seeker or a result of careful, logical thinking. It's Zuko being pushed to his emotional limit and putting his one goal over everything else, including his safety. This card shouldn't have been blue, rather some variation of black and red. I don't mind blue being added into the mix, as there's some logic to Zuko's decision, but it shouldn't have been the only color. Its abilities are also completely disconnected from its role in the story. Giving our creatures flash implies some sort of collective ambush, but the Blue Spirit acts alone. The same is true for drawing cards, gaining knowledge and resources through other creatures, allies, entering. It should have been a sneaky card, unblockable, or even shadow, as the Blue Spirit is an excellent stealth fighter. It also should have needed to accomplish its goal alone, and the reward for that shouldn't have been gaining resources, but denying them. Zuko isn't gaining anything by freeing Aang, other than denying Zhao his prize. Admittedly, you could argue that he might have been trying to capture Aang at the same time as he freed him, but I disagree with that interpretation. Zuko isn't powerful enough to capture Aang by himself, especially in unfavorable circumstances, and he knows that. If I may redesign the card a little, a mono-black creature that is unblockable, and when it deals combat damage to an opponent, while no other creature deals combat damage at the same time, that opponent has to discard a card. If you really insist on blue, make it Dimir and add Flash. Seeing the unconscious Zuko in front of him, Aang is startled, but still only hesitates for a brief moment before rescuing him. Had he left him there, Zuko would undoubtedly have been declared a traitor to the Fire Nation and been taken prisoner. Aang places him in a safe spot, somewhere in the forest. As Zuko slowly recovers, Aang talks to him and says that in another life, they might have been friends. Zuko instantly attacks him. Aang then runs back to his friends and gives them the cure for their illness. Now, if you'll indulge me, I'm not one to get stuck on small plot holes, they're whatever, but this one bothers me a little. Zhao never uses the archers again. They captured Aang on their first attempt without any trouble at all, and his escape wasn't their fault by any means, but this is still the last we hear of them. The Fortuneteller takes place in a poorly situated city that was built right underneath an active volcano. But to the citizens' luck, there's a forecasting Fortuneteller that lives there who is always keeping everybody up to date on if they have to be worried about imminent death. The gang visits her and inquires about their future, with jokes made about how Aang's future is a destiny most important, involving a great battle between good and evil that will determine the fate of the entire world. But obviously he already knows that and is much more interested in romance. Same for everybody else. They all want to know about their romantic futures. Well, except for Sokka, who thinks this all is nonsense. Shenanigans ensue, the volcano erupts, and the team needs to artificially create signals in the clouds for the Fortuneteller to read to get the villagers to evacuate. Then Aang does some impressive airbending to save the village from the eruption, and we have some mild romantic development between Aang and Katara. It's a simple story about taking destiny into your own hands. As Team Avatar are traveling, they run into the remains of a fight. Sokka quickly deduces that this was a conflict between the Fire Nation and warriors of the Water Tribe. The group follows the trail until they eventually find a beached ship, which they recognize as being from their father's fleet. Only moments later do they run into the owner of this ship, Bato, a longtime family friend. Within Magic, named characters are legendary creatures of great importance. Everybody else doesn't get that luxury. The default for a character on a Magic card is to be nameless. But that doesn't apply to other disciplines of storytelling. In Avatar, a character-driven narrative, nearly everyone we encounter has a name and a backstory. Here, a name is the default. But that doesn't mean that those characters are crucial to the overarching plot. When adapting a character-driven narrative into Magic the Gathering, it's easy to equate the value of one with the other. Named characters in the story should obviously become named characters on the cards. But that can accidentally ascribe greater importance to those characters than they originally carry. Names in Magic are more meaningful than names in Avatar. Bato didn't get his own legendary card. Instead, he's depicted on South Pole Voyager. If you paid close attention, then you might have noticed that Forecasting Fortuneteller and Hermetic Herbalist received the same treatment. I really like this choice. Bato is important in this episode, but he could have been replaced by a different South Pole Voyager. South Pole Voyager is a white 2-mana 2/2 that whenever he or another ally we control enters, we gain 1 life. And if that happens for the second time in a single turn, then we also draw a card. When Sokka and Katara meet Bato, they feel a great sense of relief. It's proof that their father is still alive. They've also been traveling for a while now, and Bato gives them a feeling of home and hope. He heals them. Bato also gives Sokka the opportunity to do a traditional water tribe coming-of-age ritual, ice dodging. Sokka is tasked with navigating a dangerous stretch of ocean, which would usually have been ice, but since they are far from home, rocks and cliffs had to do. Bato heals and acts as a teacher and mentor. He gains life and draws cards. Before the ice dodging, as the Water Tribe gang are excitedly sharing stories, Aang is strolling the beach by himself. He isolated himself from the group as he began suspecting that Sokka and Katara might leave him to meet up with their dad. Then a courier arrives, asking for Bato. Aang says he knows him, and the courier hands him a map with a rendezvous point. Aang doesn't want his friends to leave him, so instead of delivering the map as he promised, he hides it. The ice dodging begins, and Sokka expertly manages the rough seas given to him. Not only that, but he showcases quick and adaptive thinking as he utilizes Katara's and Aang's water and airbending to get across a stretch of rocks that would have otherwise been impassable. Sokka, lateral strategist, highlights this first step in Sokka's growth. He's no longer just white, now also incorporating blue, the color of knowledge and ingenuity. His vigilance remains, but his stance shifts slightly towards defense, indicating a more careful approach to his surroundings. He also gains an ability. Whenever he and at least one other creature attack, draw a card. Again, focused around knowledge and now also on cooperation. Sokka doesn't try to solve all of his problems by himself anymore. He has learned to depend on his friends. After successfully ice dodging, Bato praises the group and gives them traditional ceremonial marks. Wisdom for Sokka, bravery for Katara, and trust for Aang. This breaks Aang, who confesses that he had hidden the map meant to help Bato find Sokka and Katara's father. Outraged, the two siblings leave Aang behind to look for their father. Aang is alone. Everybody he knew for his entire life up until only a few weeks ago is dead. Taken either by the Fire Nation or old age. Baumi and Appa are the only exceptions. What he did here was undoubtedly a betrayal of Sokka and Katara's trust, but he was afraid of what would become of him if they left. I wish this had received its own card. Team Avatar reunites, of course, as both sides realize their overreaction and apologize. During all of this, Zuko runs into June, an impressive bounty hunter. June commands Nyla, a Shirshu, a giant creature that can find anyone via their smell, even if they are the whole world away. Zuko is still holding on to Katara's necklace, which Nyla then uses to track down Team Avatar. Nyla, Shirshu Sleuth, is a black 5-mana 4/5 that exiles a creature from our graveyard when it enters. We then lose X life and create X clue tokens, where X is that creature's mana value. Then we are tasked with searching and finding that creature, as once we no longer control any clues, we return the exiled creature back to our hand. We start off by giving Nyla a hint of a creature, then chase it down across the world, and finally find it. Zuko finds Aang, and a big battle ensues. Aang wins, and as an extra prize for his troubles, receives Katara's necklace from Zuko. Team Avatar makes it out safely, all reunited and reconciled. On Appa, the siblings tell Aang that they won't ever leave him alone. He's part of their family. Aang, relieved and thankful, then returns Katara's necklace to her. She gives him a kiss on the cheek, and the group flies off into the sunset. Team Avatar attends a festival in the Fire Nation town. Still in the Earth Kingdom, to be clear, the Fire Nation has partially colonized the Earth Kingdom. Aang has to learn firebending eventually, and this seems like a good opportunity for him to get a closer look at it. But they are discovered and have to flee, which they manage with the assistance of a Fire Nation deserter. Leaving behind the town, He informs them that he is part of a group of Fire Nation deserters and that their leader, Zhong, is a firebending master that could teach Aang. But when Aang asks him for help, Zhong refuses. He says that Aang isn't ready. He has to master water and earthbending first, because whereas water is cool and soothing, and earth is steady and stable, fire will spread and destroy everything in its path. In response, Avatar Roku appears to Zhong, insulted by his lack of confidence, and instructs him to teach Aang firebending. Zhong begrudgingly agrees. He begins Aang's lesson by trying to teach him patience and concentration, tasking him with meditation for hours on end. No firebending, just breathing and contemplation. Zhong tells Aang about a student who rushed this process and whose lack of discipline only brought unnecessary destruction. This frustrates Aang, who feels ready for more, but he does his best to play along, until finally Zhong lets him try actual firebending, although starting by tempering fire rather than making it. But just as they begin, Zhong is called away by one of his men. Aang, left to himself, ignites his kindling and begins playing around with the flame. He grows it, he throws it, he dances it through the air. Katara, who's nearby and watching, tells him to be careful, but Aang doesn't listen. He surrounds himself with a ring of flames and expands it, laughing, enjoying his newfound abilities, until he takes it a step too far and loses control. Katara is still nearby. The flames sweep across the air, reaching her. She has to protect herself with her hands, causing them to be severely burned. Reckless Blaze is a red 5-mana sorcery lesson that deals 5 damage to each creature. Whenever a creature we control dies this way, we add a red mana. This card is a complete design mistake. Aang's failed firebending is a hugely traumatic moment for him, and it results in him not firebending again for a very long time. Reckless Blaze dealing 5 damage to each creature is fine, that makes sense. What doesn't is that we gain a benefit for killing our own creatures. Aang burning Katara was of no benefit to him. Reckless Blaze encourages us to kill lots of our own, as we can transfer that into mana. The gameplay is the polar opposite to the moment depicted. There was no benefit to Aang's carelessness. Katara then runs away, in pain and hurt. She places her burnt hands in the nearby river and, to her surprise, discovers a new ability she didn't know she had. She heals herself. This is part of waterbending. Some waterbenders have the ability to heal, and Katara is one of them. This healing isn't all-encompassing, it can only heal wounds to a certain degree, and it's also quite slow. Waterbender's Restoration is a blue 2-mana instant lesson that has us waterbend X as an additional casting cost. We then get to flicker X creatures we control until the end of turn. For this card, healing is interpreted as flickering. This isn't how flickering is usually shown. Instead, it tends to be about evading or ghosts. But it does make sense when we consider how flickering plays out. It can, in fact, heal marked damage off of a creature, and it protects them from other lethal phenomena. It's a new way to look at the mechanic, but an appropriate one. Katara returns to a distressed Aang, who tells her that he will never firebend again. But she shows her healed hands, which returns some vitality to Aang's eyes. In the meantime, Zhong confronts Admiral Zhao. Zhao had heard that the Avatar appeared in the Fire Nation town and then headed up the river with a small fleet of boats to where he suspected he might be. It's revealed that Zhao was Zhong's former pupil. The two fight, and we see that Zhong is truly a firebending master. He holds off Zhao and his troops all by himself. Then Aang shows up to help, and Zhong distracts the troops away from Aang and Zhao. The two, left alone, face off in a duel. Aang recalls Zhong's lessons about how uncontrolled firebending only brings unnecessary destruction and begins taunting Zhao rather than fighting him. Zhao falls for it, throwing fireball after fireball with no regard for his surroundings. All Aang has to do is dodge, and within seconds, Zhao's entire fleet is set ablaze. Aang then leaves the livid Zhao behind and regroups with his friends, and they make their way towards the Northern Air Temple. Our heroes had heard stories about there being airwalkers, people flying through the sky. Aang assumes that these tales are about his people from 100 years ago, but further inquiry reveals that, apparently, there are people walking in the air right now. As we approach the Northern Air Temple, we see children flying on gliders, zooming around like Aang. But Aang quickly points out that they are not flying, they are just gliding, meaning they are not airbending. Aang still joins the other kids in the air. He then encounters one particularly skilled glider pilot who engages in a bit of a show-off contest with him. They land together, and it's revealed that Tio is paraplegic and is flying in a wheelchair glider combination. We see this in Mechanical Glider, and just one quick note on that card. I feel like this artwork implies that Tio is dead, with like a picture remembering him. And I just wanted to tell you that Tio is fine. I don't know why they made the art this way. Tio is fine and happy and healthy. Please don't worry about him. Sokka is absolutely blown away by Tio's wheelchair and glider. Tio tells him that his father designed it and then takes them on a tour through the temple. The temple was transformed. Machinery was installed all throughout it, with pipes going through walls and ceilings and ancient statues repurposed as exhausts. No longer a place of contemplation and spirituality, it's been turned industrial. Sokka thinks this is fantastic, a place of engineering and innovation. But Aang is horrified. His people's history and culture destroyed in favor of utilitarian progress. Then they run into the mastermind behind this place. The Mechanist, Aerial Artisan, is a blue 3-mana 1/3. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, he creates a clue token. The Mechanist is a curious and easily inspired person. He can take nearly any input and transform it into an idea that could be used to construct something fantastic. Our non-creature spells are the inspiration. The clues are his ideas. He can also tap to turn target artifact token we control into a 3/1 construct with flying until end of turn. He can make his ideas into usable inventions. Aang and the Mechanist don't get along. Aang argues that he's desecrating the temple, but the Mechanist tells him that he's turned it into a home for people searching for freedom, especially for his son. He means no harm, but he also won't stop just for people who are no longer here. In his view, he is improving on what already existed in the same way that nature does. The Mechanist then hurries off to continue his work, and Sokka joins him. Turns out that Sokka has quite the affinity for engineering, and he helps the Mechanist solve an issue with a hot air balloon he's been developing. Aang continues exploring the temple alongside Tio and Katara, and eventually finds a sanctuary the same way the Southern Air Temple has one. It's only accessible to airbenders, so he assumes that it'll still be intact, especially since Tio says he's never been in there. But as he opens its doors, he finds an unfinished prototype of a war balloon with a Fire Nation insignia. The Mechanist has secretly been building weapons for the Fire Nation. When confronted, the Mechanist confesses that the Northern Air Temple has long been under threat by the Fire Nation. The only reason why they've been able to stay here is that he's agreed to supply the Fire Nation with weapons in exchange. As coincidence would have it, his next meeting with the Fire Nation War Minister is only minutes away. He asks the kids to leave, but they refuse. In a panic, he requests that they at least hide, which they do. Then the war minister arrives, clearly used to the situation and looking for the product he had ordered. But Aang has had enough. He leaps forward, attacks the minister and forces him to flee. But before he does, the minister announces that Aang has doomed the temple to destruction. The rest of the episode is a lengthy battle between the Fire Nation and the citizens of the Northern Air Temple, aided by Team Avatar. They manage to win, driving the Fire Nation away. A big factor in their victory is the war balloon, now finished thanks to Sokka's ideas. But even though they defended the Northern Air Temple, the balloon is taken down. The episode closes with the shot we see on Fire Nation salvages, of the war minister looking satisfied upon the salvaged remains of the war balloon, now in Fire Nation hands. The card reflects this by allowing reanimation from opposing graveyards after dealing combat damage. It's been a long journey, but finally, the Northern Water Tribe comes into sight. Guided by waterbenders, Team Avatar make their way into the capital of the Northern Water Tribe, a huge city shaped by waterbending and naturally guarded by enormous walls of ice. News of this reaches Zhao, who decides that to take on this mighty nation, he needs as large an invasion force as he can muster. He confiscates Zuko's ship and crew and requests that Iroh join him as a general. Iroh refuses. Zhao then inspects the quarters and notices 2 broadswords hung as decoration in Zuko's room. Zhao instantly identifies them as the Blue Spirit's weapons. He indirectly confronts Zuko over it, but then leaves him and his uncle behind on their ship. Later in the night, Zhao hires the group of pirates that had previously already clashed with Zuko to assassinate him. They attack in the middle of the night using explosives to destroy the entire ship. We see Zhao offer his condolences to Iroh over tea. Iroh then accepts his offer to become a general in his fleet. Team Avatar is welcomed to the Northern Water Tribe with great fanfare. A feast is thrown in their honor, and Aang is quickly introduced to the greatest waterbending master in the tribe, Master Pakku. Aang requests that he not be taught alone, but alongside his friend, and Master Pakku agrees. But then, the next morning, when the lessons are about to begin, Master Pakku sees who Aang was referring to: Katara, a girl. Adhering to patriarchal Northern Water Tribe tradition, he refuses to teach her. Here, women don't learn waterbending to fight, they only learn to heal. Master Pakku tells Katara to leave and head to the healing huts. Aang is outraged at this, and Katara grievously disappointed. She's wanted to learn waterbending for so long, and now a quite literal patriarchy is stopping her. Aang tries to stand with her. He says that if Pakku won't teach Katara, then he also won't learn from him. But Katara insists that Aang shouldn't jeopardize his training for her. She decides to go check out the healing huts. Sokka also clashes against the patriarchy. He's been developing a crush on and a bit of a relationship with Princess Yue. The two get along great, and their interest in each other is mutual. But then Yue reveals that she's already engaged, promised into an arranged marriage. In the healing huts, Katara is surrounded by girls much younger than herself. The teacher is a gentle, older woman, Yagoda. She's depicted on Compassionate Healer, a white 2-mana tutu that gains us 1 life and lets us scry 1 whenever it becomes tapped. Tapping can pay for waterbending, scrying is thinking and knowledge. She waterbends to heal and teach. Yagoda and Katara get to talk, and Yagoda congratulates Katara on her engagement. Katara is confused by this, but then Yagoda points out that her necklace is a betrothal necklace. Katara replies that the necklace is just a family heirloom, passed down from her grandmother to her mother, and now to her. Yagoda then takes another look at it, and realizes that she recognizes the carving. She tells Katara that she looks just like her grandmother Kana, revealing that she had known Kana because she was born here in the Northern Water Tribe. Kana was engaged, but then mysteriously left the Northern Water Tribe and was never seen again. That night, Sokka has an idea. If Pakku won't teach Katara but will teach Aang, why doesn't Aang just teach Katara? The two immediately agree that it's a great solution that would make everybody happy and head outside to practice. But they are spotted by Pakku, who declares that they have disrespected his tribe's traditions and that now Aang too is expelled from his lessons. The next morning, Katara tries to get Pakku to accept Aang as his student again, but continues running headfirst into the patriarchal expectations of the tribe. Frustrated and fed up, Katara challenges Pakku to a duel. He refuses, causing Katara to snap and simply attack him. Pakku, who's now had enough of her as well, finally takes her challenge and the two fight. In this duel, Katara displays a much greater skill of waterbending than she had during the earlier moments of the season. It's clear that her journey has taught her much and that she's got an affinity for waterbending. Katara, Water Tribe's Hope, is a blue and white 5-mana 3/3 with Vigilance. When she enters, she creates a 1/1 white ally creature token. Both Vigilance and the ally don't make a lot of sense by themselves. Katara is neither the most aware of the group, nor is she the easiest to get along with. But she is a waterbender, and that's what these abilities are about. Vigilance allows her to attack and still be ready to waterbend, and the ally can also be used for waterbending costs, like for her final ability. Waterbend X, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX until end of turn. Using her waterbending, Katara enhances both her and her allies' power. I'm unsure where to place this card. It's difficult to distinguish the location of the scene. It could be at the North Pole, but it's unlikely given Katara's clothing and the design of the bridge. The name also doesn't fully check out. Katara isn't really the Water Tribe's Hope. This may seem like I'm trying to diminish her accomplishments, but this exact phrase never appears. Aang is the world's hope, and Katara is from the Water Tribe and helping him, but then calling her the Water Tribe's Hope feels more like word association than anything specific. Weirdly, a seemingly more generic name like Katara Waterbender would have been better. Katara has been wanting to become a waterbender. That's why she's fighting Pakku. Getting acknowledged as one would be a big moment for her. Unfortunately, this card doesn't represent Katara or her journey well. It's a Mechanics First design, which is a real shame given that it's one of her big rares. It also has some really awkward story implications, because this is ultimately a supporting creature, and Pakku was trying to force her into a supporting role, but that's not what Katara wants to be. She wants to be powerful herself. I think there's a valid interpretation of this card that enforces the patriarchal ideas of the Northern Water Tribe. And that's really bad, and I don't like that. This is not a good card. Katara and Pakku fight, and despite her best and very impressive efforts, she still loses against the Old Master. But during their duel, Katara's necklace falls off. Pakku, walking away, sees it and picks it up. He recognizes it as the necklace he made 60 years ago. Pakku tells Katara that Kana was arranged to marry him, but then she disappeared. He seems genuinely saddened by this. Katara explains that her grandmother refused to let the patriarchal, sexist Northern Water Tribe traditions rule her life. That's why she left. That's why Pakku lost her. This causes a revelation and a change of heart in Pakku. The next morning, we see both Aang and Katara being trained by him. In the distance, an enormous fleet of Fire Nation warships begins approaching. On one of the ships, we see Iroh whispering to a masked Fire Nation soldier, telling him that their plan is working and that Zhao doesn't suspect a thing. The soldier undoes his mask and reveals himself to be an injured Zuko. It's peaceful and quiet in the north. Aang and Katara are studying waterbending under Pakku, both progressing quickly, although Katara is taking it much more seriously and as a result is outpacing Aang. Pakku praises her, calling her his best student. Sokka, in the meantime, is taking Yue on a forbidden date. They are not crossing any lines because Yue feels obligated to her fiancé, but they are definitely teetering on the lines. Then, dark grey snow begins to fall. Sokka recognizes this phenomenon. It occurs when snow mixes with the black soot exhausted by Fire Nation warships. A black cloud looms on the horizon. The Northern Water Tribe readies its army. When the first Fire Nation ship launches its attack, Aang heads out to sea to take it on by himself. Impressively, he alone manages to take down an entire ship, but it takes a great deal of effort. Then, a massive fleet comes into view, covering the horizon. The Fire Nation continues launching flaming rocks at the Northern Water Tribe, who are focused on defense. But as the night approaches, the Fire Nation fleet comes to a halt. Iroh explains that waterbenders draw their power from the moon, becoming stronger during the night, especially now with the coming full moon. Zhao decides to hold off the full assault until the morning, as he's working on a solution for the moon problem. Zuko and Iroh meet in secret. Zuko is boarding a small canoe to make his way into the Northern Water Tribe by himself, to try and capture the Avatar before Zhao gets the chance. Iroh expresses his concern and tells Zuko, recalling the loss of his son, that he thinks of him as his own. He hugs Zuko, and Zuko promises that he'll return. Zuko then begins his solo infiltration, encountering some turtle seals on the way, which he uses as a natural guide to make his way in. Back in the Northern Water Tribe, an exhausted Aang expresses his frustration and anxiety. He tells his friends that he must have taken out a dozen ships, but there was still no end to them. He's just one kid. How could he possibly save the Northern Water Tribe from an entire invading army? It's the middle of the night. Princess Yue tells Aang and Katara about the original waterbenders, the moon and the ocean. She explains that our strength comes from the spirit of the moon, and our life comes from the spirit of the ocean. This triggers an idea in Aang. Maybe the spirit world can help them survive. But he doesn't know how to get there. Then Yue has an idea. She takes Aang and Katara to the Spirit Oasis, a small island hidden in the city where it's warm enough for grass to grow. In the center of that island is a small pond with two koi fish, one white and one black, circling each other endlessly. The Spirit Oasis is the center of the Northern Water Tribe's spiritual energy, with a connection strong enough that it allows Aang to meditate and enter the spirit world. His body remains here, but his spirit is on a different journey, meaning that Aang is not responsive. Then, at the worst imaginable time, Zuko appears. Katara says she can defend Aang, and at first she's right, holding her own against Zuko. Zuko even acknowledges her growth as a bender. But then, the night comes to an end, and the sun rises, giving Zuko a burst of strength, letting him overwhelm Katara, knocking her out. He grabs the still unconscious Aang and escapes. With the sun rising, Zhao resumes his attack. Fire Nation ships breach the walls of the city, and soldiers begin invading. Zhao is confident that today will be the end of the Northern Water Tribe. Aang finds himself in the middle of a swamp in the spirit world. Unsure where to go, he asks a meditating baboon spirit for advice, but he is not particularly helpful, telling him to chase some glowing, moving wisp. With no better ideas, Aang does, and when he eventually catches it, falls into the water of the swamp. Then Avatar Roku appears as his reflection in the water. It's all very disconnected and ephemeral, highlighting the strangeness of the spirit world. Aang asks Roku how to find the moon and ocean spirits. Roku explains that the moon and ocean crossed into the mortal world long ago, and he can only think of one spirit who is old enough to still remember who they were. He guides Aang to a cave, telling and warning him of Ko, the Face Stealer. Ko is an ancient, powerful, and dangerous spirit. Roku instructs Aang that he mustn't show any emotion when facing Ko. If he does, the spirit will steal his face. Aang enters the cave and is quickly greeted by Ko, a giant, centipede-like creature with a humanoid face. As they speak, Aang remains still while Ko taunts him, swapping out his face and rotating through a range of others. Ko tells Aang that this isn't the first time they met. One of the Avatar's earlier incarnations tried to kill him as he stole the face of one of his loved ones. Seeing as Ko is still here, this line tells us a lot about his might. A spirit so powerful that it can face the anger of the Avatar and come out victorious. Aang finally manages to get to his question. He asks Ko for the location of the moon and ocean spirits, and tells him that without their help, an entire culture may soon be destroyed. Ko tells Aang the names of the spirits: Toi and La, push and pull. But he disagrees with Aang's assessment of the situation. Aang doesn't need their help. They need his, because someone is coming to kill them. He then tells him that he's actually met them before. Toi and La, your moon and ocean, have always circled each other in an eternal dance. They balance each other, push and pull, life and death, good and evil, yin and yang. This last description finally has Aang realize who Ko is talking about. The koi fish, he shouts out, his facade briefly cracking, although not long enough for Ko to realize. He then leaves, and as he tries to find his way out of the spirit world, he encounters an old friend. Heibai guides him back to the mortal realm. Ko the Face Stealer is an incredibly evocative creature. This is all we ever see of him, around 3 minutes of screen time, but those 3 minutes leave a deep impression. In Magic, he is a black 6-mana 6/6, the same stat line as the strongest avatars. When Ko enters, he exiles another creature, stealing its face. Whenever another non-token creature dies, we may exile it, stealing their face too. We can then pay 1 life at any time, however often we want, to choose a creature exiled with Ko. Ko has all activated and triggered abilities of the last chosen creature. Swapping through faces fluently from one to the next, taking their voices, their expressions. These kinds of effects previously also included becoming a copy of the chosen creature, but not so for Ko. He remains Ko with a different stolen face. A perfect Magic card. In the mortal world, Zuko is carrying a kidnapped and unconscious Aang through the frozen tundra while Team Avatar is tracking him. He ends up hiding in a cave of his own, where he talks to himself comparing Aang to his sister, who everything always came easy to. Full of anger, Zuko recites what his father used to tell him. His sister was born lucky, but he was lucky to be born. But he embraced those struggles, as he believes they are what made him strong. At the front line, the battle rages on mercilessly. For now, the Fire Nation is winning, slowly marching into the Northern Water Tribe, but things are moving quickly enough that a decisive victory before nightfall is possible. Iroh reminds Zhao again that if the night comes and the full moon rises, the Waterbenders will be unstoppable. But Zhao claims that he's planning on removing the moon from the equation. He continues, when he was a young officer stationed in the Earth Kingdom, he stumbled upon an ancient library where he learned the secret of the moon and ocean spirits' mortal forms. He declares it his destiny to kill these spirits. Iroh angrily responds that spirits aren't to be trifled with, but Zhao dismisses him, even mocking the legends that tell of Iroh's journey into the spirit world. The moon and the ocean spirit gave up their immortality. They made their choice, and they will face the consequences of that decision. As night begins to fall, Zhao, alongside a small troop, begins his search for the spirit oasis. The full moon rises. Empowered by it, the Waterbenders begin breaking through the Fire Nation's lines and make significant progress at reclaiming their city. Aang's spirit has also returned to the mortal world, and while he is at first confused about his missing body, he is automatically drawn towards it, and his spirit and body merge again. He wakes up in the cave with Zuko, and even though he's tied up, without hesitation, he attacks Zuko and tries to escape. He only makes it a few steps outside of the cave, but that's enough for Team Avatar to spot him and come to his rescue. Katara and Zuko face off again, although this time it's not much of a fight. Empowered by the full moon, Katara obliterates Zuko in a single attack, knocking him unconscious. Team Avatar then prepares to head back to the oasis, but Aang refuses to leave Zuko behind, arguing that doing so would be the same as killing him. He would freeze to death. Zhao reaches the spirit oasis. He gets out a small bag and places the moon spirit inside of it before lifting it out of the pond. As he does so, the moon and sky turn a bright red. All the waterbenders lose their bending, and the battle suddenly and radically shifts into the Fire Nation's favor, who are unaffected. Aang can feel the change too, and even Yue does. Yue is not a bender, but as she explains, she was born weak and ill. The only reason why she lives today is because her father pleaded with the moon spirit, who then gifted her life. Zhao's arrogance knows no bounds. Holding up the trapped moon spirit, he fantasizes of his own legend, of how people in the future are going to think of him. They'll call him Zhao the Conqueror. Then Aang arrives and pleads to him to drop the spirit. Hurting it wouldn't just impact the water tribes, but the entire world. Iroh then appears too, and finally, fully betraying the Fire Nation, threatens Zhao that anything he does to that spirit, he'll unleash on him tenfold. Cornered, Zhao decides to drop the spirit back into the water, and just as relief washes over the scene and Zhao turns away, impulsive anger takes hold of him, and he lashes out, attacking the moon spirit, killing it. The night turns grey. Not dark, not an absence of light, but an absence of spirit. Zhao the Moonslayer is a red 2-mana 2/2 with menace. Non-basic lands enter tapped. We talked earlier about how non-basic lands can represent civilization. Zhao is an oppressor. He harms those who wish to prosper. For 7 mana, we can also put a Conqueror counter on Zhao, and if we do, then for as long as Zhao the Conqueror is in play, all non-basic lands are mountains. This is a reference to an iconic magic card, Blood Moon, which also got a printing depicting the moment Zhao captures the Moon Spirit. Non-basic lands are mountains. In Magic, this often means death. There are many decks, particularly in older formats, that simply lose when a Blood Moon is played. But Blood Moon is also symmetrical. While our side might be better equipped to handle the consequences, that doesn't mean we are not affected. Zhao, a small, petty man who at the height of his arrogance becomes a danger to the entire world. Now, under assault by Iroh, a much more powerful firebender, he flees back to his army, leaving the Spirit Oasis behind. Iroh doesn't chase. On his retreat, Zhao runs into Zuko, who had used the commotion to free himself. The two fight as Zhao taunts Zuko, revealing that he tried to have him killed and that he knows he is the Blue Spirit. Zuko responds by arguing that he had no choice, but Zhao continues berating him. Team Avatar is grieving the loss of the Moon Spirit. Yue mourns that there's no hope now. It's over. Aang hears this, and his eyes and tattoos begin to glow. No, it's not over, he replies, and in the Avatar state, he walks into the pond of the Spirit Oasis. The water of the oasis begins to glow, and Aang and La merge their energy and anger to become one. They rise as an enormous incarnation of the ocean and begin making their way towards the Fire Nation fleet. As they come across the battling forces, the Waterbenders fall to their knees in worship, while the Fire Nation soldiers try fighting back. They stand no chance as Aang and La tear their machinery and forces to shreds. It doesn't take them long to reach Zhao and Zuko, who are still engaged in battle. Seeing Zhao, La reaches out to him specifically, ending the duel and drowning the Admiral. As Aang and La are driving off the forces of the Fire Nation, the rest of Team Avatar are still at the Spirit Oasis. They're joined by Iroh, who cuts through their desperation as he notices, with awe, that Yue had been touched by the Moon Spirit. Some of its life is in her. Yue sees the connection and takes it one step further. She decides that she has to try to give it back. Sokka immediately tells her to not do that she doesn't have to go that far. But Yue has made up her mind. She calmly replies that she has to do this. She places her hands on the dead body of the Moon Spirit, and as her life transfers from her to it, she collapses. Yue's body then disappears, and the fish reawakens. Iroh gently places it back in the water, which begins to glow, and Yue, now in spiritual form, appears in front of the group. She reaches out to Sokka one last time, telling him that she'll always be with him, and gives him a kiss before disappearing into the night sky. Yue has become the Moon Spirit. The moon reappears in the sky, and the Waterbenders regain their abilities. With Zhao dead and his army destroyed, the battle is won. The Northern Water Tribe defeated the Fire Nation. Aang, Swift Savior, is a white and blue 3-mana 2/3 with flash and flying that airbends up to one target creature or spell when he enters. It's a simple representation of Aang that doesn't depict any specific moment. However, by Waterbending 8, we can transform this Aang into Aang and La, Ocean's Fury, a 5/5 with Reach and Trample that puts a +1/+1 counter on all our tapped creatures whenever it attacks. This restriction works well with Waterbending or other attacking creatures, as they'll be tapped when they are declared attackers. The same is true for Aang and La themselves, who will usually buff themselves when attacking, growing stronger and stronger. Unfortunately, neither the front or backside of this card is as distinct as I wish it was. Aang's Swift Savior is a very generic Aang, but Aang doesn't do much airbending during the Siege of the North. He helps by going into the spirit world and communing with a spirit. We've had this issue before. Unfortunately, Wizards didn't want to explore the spiritual side of the avatar and instead focused on the standard bending and treating the spirits as cool monsters. This is where a mechanical association to the spirit world would have been incredibly helpful, and I think that's a missed opportunity. The backside isn't great either. It requires waterbending, and it works well with it, but I don't think Aang is technically waterbending here. I always got the impression that he's channeling his avatar powers through the ocean spirit and letting it rampage. He certainly doesn't consider the actions of La in this form as his own. Yue, the Moon Spirit, is a blue 4-mana 3/3 with flying and vigilance. She also lets us waterbend 5 and tap her to cast a non-creature spell from our hand without paying its mana cost. The moon is the original waterbender. It's the source and essence of the tides. It moves the entire world. In Magic, one card represents the pinnacle of power, the apex of wizardry, omniscience. I'm not saying that it's the strongest card ever printed, that's where the mana cost comes in, but its effect is undeniably overwhelmingly powerful, and Yue invokes it. She lets us waterbend to cast without paying mana costs. Of course, we can just pay mana to waterbend, but we can also tap creatures and artifacts, our entire board. The world looks up to the moon. Yue has become a cornerstone of existence. This card reflects that beautifully. It also has great artwork, some of my favorite from the set. With the Siege of the North won, a bit of time passes. We see Pakku talking to Katara, telling her that he's decided to go to the South Pole to help rebuild their sister tribe. Katara then asks who is going to teach Aang. Pakku replies that he'll have to get used to calling her Master Katara. Zuko and Iroh have found a small ship, which they're using to escape towards the Earth Kingdom. They have now officially become traitors to the Fire Nation. Iroh expresses that he's surprised that Zuko isn't trying to capture the Avatar right now. Zuko simply replies that he's tired. Iroh tells him that he should rest. A man needs his rest. In the Fire Nation, we see Fire Lord Ozai talking to a girl kneeling in front of him. He tells her that Iroh is a traitor and that her brother Zuko is a failure. He has a task for her. This concludes Season 1, Book 1, Water, of Avatar: The Last Airbender. We started with Katara and Sokka finding Aang in an iceberg, and then traveled across the entire world while being chased by Zuko and Zhao. Along the way, we learned about the damage a 100-year war has inflicted upon both the natural and spiritual world, and what needs to be done to heal it. Aang, the Avatar, has to first restore hope and then balance. By the end of the season, we've made good progress on those goals, as Aang has learned waterbending and Zhao was defeated. But his isn't the only story. Zuko started the season as a simple antagonist, a hunter in pursuit. This facade cracked when we learned about his tragic past. Soon, Zuko was driven to desperation, betraying the Fire Nation multiple times, until he and his uncle fully became outcasts. Nowhere left to turn, their future is uncertain. We hope you enjoyed this incredibly deep dive into Avatar: The Last Airbender and Magic the Gathering. We've already started working on similar videos for Season 2 and 3. If you can, please support us on Patreon, link in the description. Extremely long and difficult to produce videos like this are only possible with your direct support, best expressed in two forms: giving the video a thumbs up, and again, supporting us directly on Patreon. We expect that Book 2 will be a bit quicker to finish than Book 1. If you would like early access to the video as we finish the individual segments, then you can also find that on Patreon. Thank you for watching.